I was looking for a job, preferably for a private caregiver. When I saw the ad online, it seemed perfect. Elderly woman in need of assistance with daily activities. Live-in preferred. The address was close to the city, and the number belonged to a woman named Mrs. Clay. I called her that same afternoon. Her voice was shaky but polite. She said her daughter had moved abroad and she needed help. She asked if I could come by the next morning. I didn't think twice. Her voice made me trust her, the way old ladies sound when they've been alone for too long. The next day I took the first bus and arrived around 9 a.m. The neighborhood looked quiet, too quiet. No traffic, no kids, not even dogs barking. The house was at the end of a dead-end street, old and half-painted. When she opened the door, she looked just like I expected. Fragile, pale, thin. She smiled with missing teeth and waved me in. The living room smelled like medicine and wet carpet. She said her knees hurt too much to move around, so she needed help cooking and cleaning. She offered me tea. I said yes. I shouldn't have. She went to the kitchen and I sat at the table waiting. My bag was next to my chair, still zipped. I remember that clearly. I heard cups clinking, water boiling, then footsteps that weren't hers. Heavier, steady. When I turned around, a man stepped out from behind the hallway. His face was dirty, his eyes cold and wide. Before I could even speak, he swung something, maybe a pipe, against the side of my head. I fell. Everything went black for a second. I remember the taste of blood in my mouth and the woman's voice screaming something, but it was distant. Then he grabbed my arms and dragged me across the floor. My vision kept fading in and out. I couldn't fight back, not even scream. When I woke up, I was in the back seat of a car. My wrists were tied. The woman was gone. The man was driving fast. Trees blurred through the window, no buildings, no traffic, just endless road. I asked him where he was taking me. He didn't answer. I kicked the door, but it didn't move. He looked at me through the mirror once. I'll never forget that look. He didn't blink. After what felt like hours, the car stopped. He pulled me out, still tied, and carried me into another house. This one smelled like rot. He threw me down a short flight of stairs. My shoulder hit the floor hard. I couldn't see much, only a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling, flickering every few seconds. The walls were concrete, stained and wet. There was a mattress on the floor, dirty and torn. He would come down every few hours, sometimes to throw food, sometimes to stare at me. Once he asked if I had family. I said yes. He smiled and said, "Good." Then he left. At night, I heard other voices. One of them was younger, maybe another man. They whispered upstairs, arguing, laughing. Sometimes I heard a door slam. Once I heard someone crying. I never saw who it was. One night, he came down carrying a flashlight and a bucket of water. He made me wash myself while he stood watching. I tried to look away, but he grabbed my hair and forced my face into the water. He said I should be grateful. When I coughed and gasped, he smiled. Then he left again. Days passed. My wrists were swollen from the rope. I started to realize there was no escape. Until one morning, I noticed the basement door wasn't locked. It was early. I could hear them arguing upstairs. I moved quietly, untied my ankles using a sharp piece of metal from the bed frame. My hands hurt so much I almost fainted, but I kept going. I pushed the door slowly. It opened with a creak. I froze, waiting for footsteps. None came. I climbed the stairs step by step. The kitchen was empty. The window above the sink was open. I could smell fresh air for the first time in days. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like my chest would explode. I went to the back door. It wasn't locked either. I pushed it open and ran. Outside there was nothing. No houses, no people, just open fields and dirt roads. The air was hot, dry. I kept running until I couldn't breathe. I saw a line of trees and thought maybe there was a road behind them. When I reached them, I looked back. The house was far, small in the distance. I thought I'd made it. Then I heard the sound of a car engine. The car came fast, kicking up dust. I tried to hide behind the trees, but he saw me. He got out of the car and started walking toward me with a crowbar in his hand. I ran again, but he caught up. He hit my back first, then my legs. I fell face first into the dirt. I screamed, but no one could hear. He didn't say a word while hitting me. When I stopped moving, he crouched down next to me and said I ruined everything. I didn't understand what he meant. He dragged me back to the car by my hair and threw me inside. My vision kept fading again. Back in the basement, he tied me to a pole. No food that day, no water. The next morning, he came in with another man, older, with gloves on. They whispered things I couldn't hear. The older man stared at me for a long time and said I should have stayed quiet. They left me there again. That night I heard them laughing upstairs. I heard bottles breaking, music playing faintly. I stayed awake until morning, shaking. When he came down again, I expected another beating. Instead, he sat on the floor next to me. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked tired. He said someone had paid for me. I didn't understand at first. Paid for what? He said it was for my release, that I shouldn't have seen the house because now they couldn't just let me go. He put a gun to my head. I froze. I didn't cry or beg, I just waited for it to end. But he didn't pull the trigger. He lowered it slowly. He said he wasn't a killer, that another man would have done it without thinking. Then he leaned closer and whispered, "If someone comes knocking at my door, I'm gonna regret letting you live. If that happens, someone will knock your door. And you know what? They are not going to doubt, understand?" He drove me out that night. My hands were still tied and my eyes blindfolded. We didn't talk. I didn't even know what direction we were going. After maybe an hour, he stopped the car on the side of a long, empty road. He got out, opened my door, untied my hands, and pushed me out. Then he drove away. I lay there for a while staring at the stars. I could barely move. My body hurt everywhere, but I got up and started walking. I don't know how long it took, but eventually I saw lights. A gas station, maybe 2 kilometers away. The police found me sitting on the ground near the station. I couldn't even explain what happened at first. They said I was in shock. They took me to the hospital, asked questions I couldn't answer. Where the house was, how many men there were, what they looked like. I didn't know. Everything was a blur. Today I remember a little more, but even so, I won't tell the police anything about what I experienced. It's not worth it. I don't want to risk my family's life. This story is based on John Edward Robinson, known as the internet's first serial killer, who was an American murderer active between the 1980s and 2000. He lured victims using fake job offers, personal ads, and online chat rooms, often promising work or companionship. Once he gained their trust, he manipulated, exploited, and ultimately killed them. Police discovered several of his victims' bodies stored in barrels on his property. Robinson was arrested in 2000 and later sentenced to death for multiple murders, marking one of the earliest known cases of using the internet to commit serial crimes.
I started this job 3 months ago. Night driving. Simple stuff. I pick up clients, drive them to wherever they say, and don't ask questions. That's the rule. No questions, no problems. That's what the guy who hired me told me. The pay was good enough to make me ignore how vague it all sounded. I didn't sign anything. They just told me where to go and when. Always at night. Always in black cars that weren't mine. The passengers were strange. Always men in suits. Never women, never kids. No one ever spoke. They just got in, gave me an address, and stared out the window or at their phones like I didn't exist. I tried small talk a couple of times, but They'd look at me like I'd broken some sacred rule, so I stopped. I learned to drive in silence. Still, every night felt off. The way they acted, it wasn't normal. Their faces were too blank, their voices too calm when they gave the addresses. And sometimes when the car stopped at red lights, I'd feel eyes on me. I'd look up through the mirror and one of them would be staring directly at me. No emotion at all, just staring. It made my stomach twist every time. But I needed the money. Rent was late, bills were piling up, and this was the only job that didn't care about my record. So I kept driving, pretending not to notice how wrong everything felt. They called me just after midnight for a pickup outside an office building downtown. When I got there, 2 men in suits were standing on the curb. Between them was a man sitting in a wheelchair, his head tilted slightly to one side, dark glasses covering his eyes even though it was pitch black outside. One of the men waved me over like I was a cab. They opened the back door and lifted the man out of the chair. His body hung limp between them like he was drunk or asleep. They sat him in the back seat, adjusted his coat, and shut the door without saying a word to me. Then one of them leaned in and said, low and sharp, "Drive to 77 Willow Street. No stops." There was something off about the way he said it. His tone wasn't a request. It was a warning. I nodded and started the engine. The 2 men stayed on the sidewalk, watching until the car turned the corner. I kept my eyes forward, hands tight on the wheel. The first thing I noticed about the man in the back was his smell. It hit me halfway down the block. Cheap perfume. The kind that burns your nose. Strong enough to make me roll the window down a crack. I glanced in the mirror. He was sitting straight, facing forward, his hands on his knees, still, not breathing heavily, not moving at all, just sitting there. The route was long, 30 minutes through quiet streets with barely any traffic. Every minute stretched. The man in the back didn't move once. I tried to convince myself he was asleep, but there was no rhythm to his breathing, no sound at all, just that perfume, like the inside of a cheap funeral home. At one point, I cleared my throat and said something. "Sorry about the traffic. It's usually lighter this time of night." Nothing, not a word. I looked again in the mirror, hoping for even the smallest reaction. His head hadn't moved, but under the dark glasses, could have sworn he was looking straight into the reflection. Felt it. Like the second I looked away, he'd blink or smile or something worse. The longer I drove, the more I started to shake. My fingers slipped on the steering wheel from sweat. I thought about pulling over, just for a second, to breathe. But the words, "no stops," echoed in my head. The company didn't play around. I heard stories about drivers who broke the rules. None of them worked there anymore. Then came the sound, a low, broken mumble from the back seat. I froze. It wasn't a word, more like a moan, soft and wet, like someone trying to speak underwater. I looked in the mirror again, and for the first time, he moved. His jaw shifted slightly, trembling. I slowed down just enough to glance over my shoulder. He was shaking. His hands twitched on his knees, fingers jerking like he was fighting to move. His lips parted, drool sliding down his chin. I gripped the wheel tighter and forced myself to keep driving. My heartbeat drowned out the sound of the tires. I couldn't take it anymore. The sounds were getting louder, whispers maybe, words I couldn't make out. I leaned forward, pretending to adjust the radio, but my eyes went to the mirror again. His head turned, just a little, enough for me to see his mouth move. It wasn't random mumbling now. It was like he was trying to form sentences, but his tongue wasn't working right. His teeth clicked together. His head twitched forward, slow at first, then faster, until his chin almost hit his chest. He was convulsing, softly, like something was crawling under his skin. My stomach flipped. I wanted to stop the car. I wanted to open the door and run. But that voice from my boss, "no stops," stuck in my head like a nail. My job was to drive. That's it. Then he made a sound I'll never forget. A laugh, or maybe it was a cough. Sharp, dry, and too human to ignore. I pressed harder on the gas. The faster I went, the louder he got. His breath came in short bursts. Then, suddenly, silence again. I didn't want to look, but I did. His head was up now, perfectly straight. His glasses reflected the dashboard lights, but behind the reflection, I could see movement. His eyes. They weren't looking forward anymore. They were aimed directly at me. I started crying without realizing it. Quietly, trying not to make a sound, I couldn't tell what was worse, the silence or the breathing behind me. Every second felt like it stretched longer than the last. When I finally saw the street sign for Willow, I almost screamed in relief. The address was at the end of a cul-de-sac. No lights, no houses, just a big metal gate and 2 black cars parked outside. The same kind of men were waiting there. Dark suits, blank faces. I stopped the car, put it in park, and tried to steady my breathing. They walked over slowly. One of them tapped the window. I rolled it down, shaking so hard I could barely move. I told them something was wrong with the man in the back. I didn't want to turn around to show them, but I had to. I looked and saw the man jerking slightly, mumbling again. His glasses had slipped down, showing pale eyes rolled halfway back. One of the men opened the back door, glanced at him, and his face twisted in anger. The other guy stepped forward, grabbed the man by the throat, and started squeezing. There was no hesitation, no shouting, just the sound of cracking bones. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The driver's seat felt like a coffin. The man in the suit dropped the body to the ground like trash. Then he pulled out his phone and started yelling at someone.
"He was alive! You told me he was processed!"
He slammed the phone shut, breathing hard. He turned to me, eyes full of rage. Before I could react, he reached in, grabbed the back of my head, and slammed it against the steering wheel. My ears rang, everything spinning. He leaned in close, whispering through his teeth.
"You didn't see anything. You didn't hear anything. Drive when we call. That's all you do."
I nodded, barely able to see through the blood in my eyes. I don't remember driving home. The next thing I knew, I was in bed, still wearing my work clothes. My phone buzzed at noon. A message from the company. Pick up at 1 a.m. Don't be late. No explanation, no apology, just that. That night I showed up like always. Same car, same smell of cheap air freshener. My head still hurt, and the dried blood on my hairline itched under my hat. The streets were empty, again. Every shadow looked like those men waiting for me. The passengers didn't talk, didn't look at me, didn't act like anything had happened. But I couldn't stop seeing that man's neck snapping in front of me. Every time I blinked, I saw it again. The way his body twitched once before going limp, and the way the other man didn't even flinch. Now, every time I drive, I feel like someone's in the back seat, even when it's empty. Sometimes I check the mirror and swear I see him sitting there, head tilted, glasses on. That same damn perfume filling the car. It's been 2 months since that day. I still drive for them. I can't quit. Every night they text me new addresses, new passengers, new names. No explanations. I just drive. It was my first night working as a security guard. I didn't even want the guy, I needed the money. The place was some kind of indoor amusement center, full of arcade machines, little restaurants, and a big stage with animatronic animals. The company was reopening after years of being closed. They called it Funland. It didn't look like much fun to me. My shift started at midnight. The manager, a short guy with oily hair, gave me the usual tour. Restrooms, exits, security room, break room. Everything smelled like dust and plastic. When he left, I locked the door behind him and sat down in front of the monitors. There were 8 cameras. Most showed empty halls and rooms filled with arcade machines. Nothing seemed out of place. I checked my phone. No signal. Figures. The walls were thick concrete. They gave me a landline to use in case of emergencies. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. For the first 2 hours, nothing happened. I drank half a bottle of warm soda and started feeling dizzy from boredom. My eyes drifted between the screens. Then, somewhere in the corner of one camera, I thought I saw movement. But I figured it was probably just the monitor flickering. Around 2:30 a.m., I leaned back in my chair, yawning. Then, I noticed it again. Movement in camera 4, the one facing the stage. I leaned closer. One of the animatronics, the bear, wasn't in the same position it had been in earlier. It had its head slightly turned now, pointing toward the hallway. At first, I told myself maybe the cleaning crew moved it before closing. I tried switching to other cameras. Everything else looked normal. The food court, the hallways, the back exit, all empty. I went back to camera 4. The bear was gone. I froze. I didn't hear footsteps, no noise, just the low hum of the monitors and my own breathing. I flipped through the cameras fast, trying to find it. And then I saw it. Someone or something wearing a bear costume, standing near the arcade machines. For a moment, I thought maybe it was a prank, but the place was closed. Nobody was supposed to be here. I grabbed the landline and called the manager. No dial tone. The line had been cut. I pulled out my phone again. Still no signal. The anxiety hit me in waves. Whoever was inside had disabled everything. I got up from the chair and locked the security room door. My hands were shaking. The room had no windows, just a wooden door and a bank of monitors. I checked the camera again. There were more of them now. 3 figures. One dressed as a fox, another as a bird, and the bear again. They were walking through the hallways like they knew exactly where to go. I tried to calm myself. Maybe it was just a group of vandals in costumes. Maybe I was overreacting. But when I zoomed in, I saw the fabric of the suits, dirty, torn, and soaked around the mouths. They weren't new costumes. I switched cameras to follow their movement. One of them stopped and stared directly into a camera, its head tilted slowly like it was listening. The others spread out. One was heading toward my section. I stood completely still. My heartbeat felt like hammer blows in my chest. I turned off the monitor lights and waited in the dark. Then came a faint noise from the hallway. Soft footsteps. Then a dragging sound. Something brushed against the door. They started banging on the wooden door, at first softly, then harder. Each hit made the hinges shake. I grabbed a piece of metal pipe that was leaning against the wall. The only thing between me and them was that door. Then, the pounding stopped. Silence. I waited, listening. Then I heard muffled laughter. It wasn't robotic, it was human. When I turned the monitors back on, I saw one of them standing right outside the security room, holding something long and shiny. A crowbar. The others were walking around the building, turning off lights as they moved. They knew the layout. They were hunting me. I looked for another exit. There was a ventilation shaft near the corner, but it was too small to crawl through. I could only stay hidden and hope they got bored. I watched one camera as the fox-headed figure knelt and looked straight into it again. It waved, Then, the screen went black. The next minutes felt endless. I sat on the floor, gripping the pipe, breathing quietly. Then the lights in the room flickered. The power didn't go out completely, just enough to make the room pulse in darkness. I heard something outside, like metal scraping against the floor. The first hit came hard. The door bent inward with a loud crack. Another hit, then another. I screamed for them to stop, but they didn't. When the door finally burst open, I backed into a corner. 3 figures walked in, breathing heavily inside the suits. One of them spoke, voice muffled.
"Dude, is he holding a weapon?"
The other one laughed.
"You're not supposed to fight back, man. You're the guard. Haven't you played Five Nights at Freddy's?"
I stared at them, confused. My brain couldn't process what they were saying. I shouted that I didn't know what they were talking about, to leave me alone and to get out. They started laughing harder. One of them pulled off his mask. A teenage boy, maybe 17. His face was red and sweaty. The moment they lowered their guard, I swung the pipe and hit the Fox mask guy in the side of the head. He fell, screaming. I didn't wait. I shoved the other 2 and ran. I sprinted through the hallway, slipping on something sticky. My shoulder hit the wall. I kept running, hearing footsteps behind me, the heavy stomps of the suits. They caught me near the exit doors. One tackled me from behind, and I crashed to the floor. My vision blurred. I felt kicks landing on my ribs, on my arm, on my back. I turned and grabbed one of their legs, pulling him down. He hit the ground hard. I found a loose tile near me and smashed it against his head. He stopped moving. The others froze. They didn't go for me. They crouched beside their friend, shaking him, panicking. I crawled away, every breath stabbing my chest. They didn't chase me this time. I got to my feet and ran out into the parking lot. I didn't stop until I reached the main road, waving down a passing car. The driver took one look at me covered in blood, breathing like I was dying, and called the police. At the hospital, they said I had 2 cracked ribs and a concussion. My wife and kids came to see me. My daughter, about 10, said she knew what those kids were pretending to be.
"They're from that game, Dad. Five Nights at Freddy's. The guard always gets attacked by the animatronics."
I didn't know what to say. My body was shaking, not from the pain, but from realizing those kids were playing out a fantasy. They wanted to make it real. Some detectives knocked at my door some days later. They told me they found the blood, but no bodies. All the footage was destroyed and the place was a mess. I never went back to that place. And I never will.
My dog's GPS collar started sending strange data, such as a location outside the house, even though he hadn't moved. In fact, the map showed impossible nighttime routes. One night, I followed the route and found something that shouldn't have been there. I live alone with my dog Rook in a small house near a wooded area that stays quiet at night. Every small sound stands out more than it should, and even though I got used to that silence over time, I never fully trusted it. Rook helped with that, since he reacts faster than I do, and usually notices things before I even realize something is off. I put a GPS collar on him a while ago, because the area has long, empty stretches, and losing him out there would mean I might never find him again. The collar tracks his location, heart rate, and sleep patterns, and until that night, it always worked exactly as expected. That day, nothing happened that gave me a reason to stay alert, since I followed the same routine as always before going to bed. I locked everything, checked on Rook, and went to sleep without thinking about anything unusual. The alert that woke me up later didn't feel important at first, but when I looked at the screen, I realized something was wrong in a way that didn't make sense. The notification showed that Rook's heart rate was extremely high, while the system marked him as asleep. And that contradiction was enough to make me sit up and check the hallway where he sleeps. He was there, lying still, breathing slow and calm, with no sign of stress or movement. When I looked back at the phone, the location marker showed him somewhere in the woods several hundred meters away, even though I could see him right in front of me. I checked again to make sure I wasn't misreading anything, but the position didn't change. I walked over to him and grabbed the collar, expecting to find something wrong, but it felt normal and showed no sign of damage. He looked at me for a moment, and then went back to sleep, while the app kept showing impossible data. I stayed awake, watching both Rook and the app, and after a few minutes, a movement path started forming on the map, beginning at my house and extending straight into the woods with a speed that didn't match any normal run. The line moved with direction, not randomly, like something knew exactly where it was going. I got closer to Rook and held the collar again, trying to feel anything unusual, but his body stayed relaxed and his breathing didn't change, even while the heart rate on the app kept spiking. The difference between what I saw and what the phone showed became harder to ignore with every update. I reset the collar and watched the app freeze for a moment, and when it updated again, the path disappeared and returned to the house, which made me think it was fixed. I went to bed, thinking it was just a glitch, a pretty strange one, but a glitch nonetheless. I even thought some prankster might have hacked it. I planned to go to the store the next day and exchange it. But the next day, Rook was gone. I checked every room, called his name, looked outside and searched around the yard, but there was no sign of him anywhere. The silence outside felt heavier than usual, and the absence of any movement made it worse. I opened the app again, and this time the location marker was active, showing him deep in the woods at the exact point where the path had ended during the night. The signal was stable, and it didn't jump or glitch. Before leaving, I stood at the door and looked toward the trees, and even though nothing was moving, the stillness made it harder to step outside. I didn't hear anything, but I knew I had to follow the signal. I grabbed my phone and went into the woods. The route took me off the main path and into dense areas where I had to push through branches and watch my footing, while checking the map to make sure I was going in the right direction. The deeper I went, the quieter everything became, and that silence made every step feel louder. After a long walk, I reached a clearing that didn't match anything I had seen before, and I stopped at the edge while looking at something sitting low in the center. The shape didn't match any animal I knew, and the way it held itself made it hard to understand what I was looking at. I stayed still and focused on it, and after a few seconds, it raised its head in a slow, uneven motion that made its body shift in parts. That is when I saw the collar around its neck, and the blinking light confirmed it was the same one I had placed on Rook. I didn't move closer, since the body didn't match a dog in any way, and the legs bent at angles that didn't look stable. Its mouth stayed slightly open, showing teeth that didn't line up correctly, and its posture didn't look natural. I don't know what it was, but that creature had probably taken my Rook. When it stood up, the movement came in separate steps, like each limb reacted at a different time, and then it turned toward me and took a slow step forward. I stepped back, and when it moved again, I turned and ran without checking the path. I could hear movement behind me as I pushed through the trees, And even though it didn't sound fast, it stayed present the entire time until I reached the outer edge of the woods. I got back to the house and locked everything, then checked the app again, and the location marker still showed the same position deep in the woods. I stayed inside and watched the screen for hours, waiting for it to move or disappear. It didn't. As the day went on, I kept checking outside, but I didn't see Rook anywhere, and there was no sign that he had come back. The house felt different without him, and the silence didn't feel normal anymore. When night came, I stayed awake again, and the app still showed the same location, fixed in the same spot. Nothing moved, and nothing changed, and that made it worse than before. At some point, I stopped checking the app and just sat there, listening to the quiet, waiting for something, anything to happen. In the morning, I got up and walked into the hallway, and Rook was there, sleeping in his bed like nothing had happened. He looked calm, and when he noticed me, he got up and walked over without any sign of stress or injury. I checked his neck, and the collar was there, secured and blinking like it always does. I pulled it off immediately and looked at it, trying to understand how it could be in two places at once. I opened the app, and the location showed him inside the house, with normal readings and no movement logs recorded. The path from the night before was gone, and there was nothing left on the screen that matched what I had seen. That night, I stayed awake again, and around the same time, Rook stood up and walked to the door without making a sound. He didn't bark or scratch, and he didn't look back at me. He just stood there, facing the dark outside. I didn't open the door, and I don't plan to, since I don't know what I saw in the woods, and I don't know if it ever left.
I downloaded the app because it was everywhere, and I wanted something easy that didn't require effort or ideas. I just needed something that worked fast and got reactions. Record, tap, upload, repeat, nothing more. My dog Baxter wasn't trained or special, which actually made everything easier for me. He sat still, barked when he wanted, and didn't react to the phone at all. That made the clips look more believable. The first videos followed the same pattern every time, and people didn't question it. I would record him barking once, and the app would generate something simple and harmless. I didn't even think about it while posting. The account started growing again, and I kept going without stopping. There was no reason to question anything because everything worked the way I expected. The first time something felt wrong, it didn't feel like a big moment. It just didn't match the tone of the other results. I recorded like always and waited for the app to generate the message. Before trying again, I stared at the screen longer than usual because the text took a few extra seconds to appear. That delay made me uncomfortable for no clear reason. I kept holding the phone without moving. When the text showed up, I read it twice because I didn't process it the first time. It wasn't something harmless or generic like before. It was aggressive and direct. The app showed that Baxter was telling me to stop watching him and that he was getting tired of me being near him all the time. I didn't post that clip, and I tried again immediately to get a normal result. The next one was normal, but I couldn't ignore the first one anymore. I told myself it was random and closed the app, but it stayed in my head longer than it should have. The messages kept getting worse, and I couldn't control when it happened. Some were normal, but others were violent in a way that didn't fit the app at all. That inconsistency made everything harder to ignore. I started recording more often, trying to understand what was happening, but nothing made sense. Baxter didn't change his behavior at all, which made everything worse. He acted exactly the same every time. Before pressing the button again, I stayed still for a long time, just watching him, trying to feel in control of the situation. I didn't want to rush it anymore. I needed to see it clearly. He barked once and I tapped the screen. The app translated it as him saying he wanted to tear my skin while I slept and leave me bleeding on the floor. My hands started shaking and I dropped the phone for a second before picking it up again. I felt sick reading that and I didn't want to look at the screen anymore, but I still did it again later that day. Before trying again, I locked myself in the bathroom and held the phone tight, trying to calm down enough to press the button. I kept thinking about what I'd already seen. He barked again when I came out. The app translated it as him saying he was waiting for the right moment to bite into my neck and not stop until I stopped moving. I felt my chest tighten and I couldn't stand still. I showed it to my son and he laughed like it was a joke and didn't even consider it for a second. That made me feel worse because I didn't have a way to explain what I was feeling. That night I recorded one last time even though I didn't want to. Before pressing the button, I stood in the middle of the room holding the phone and staring at Baxter, waiting for the bark. I didn't move and I didn't speak. He barked once. The app translated it as him saying he hated me and that he was going to rip my throat open when I stopped paying attention. I uninstalled the app immediately and my hands were shaking. Deleting the app didn't help because the messages stayed in my head and repeated constantly. I couldn't stop thinking about them no matter what I did. They didn't feel random anymore. Baxter didn't change his behavior at all, which made everything worse. He followed me around like always and stayed close to me. That normal behavior started to feel wrong. One night I sat in the kitchen while he ate, and I couldn't stop watching him. I kept thinking about what the app showed me, and I couldn't separate it from what I was seeing. Before getting up, I stayed there frozen in the chair, staring at him finish his food. Nothing happened, but I felt tense the entire time. My son noticed and made fun of me again without taking it seriously. I didn't respond because I didn't know how to explain it without sounding insane. That night I locked my bedroom door and stayed awake, listening to every small sound in the house. I kept expecting something to happen. A loud noise woke me up, and I sat up immediately with my heart racing. It wasn't something small or accidental. It sounded like something heavy, hitting furniture. Before getting out of bed, I stayed still, listening carefully, trying to understand what I was hearing. The sound repeated again, and I knew it wasn't Baxter. I walked into the hallway slowly, and my legs felt weak while I moved toward the stairs. The noise kept coming from downstairs, and it didn't stop. When I reached the living room, I saw two figures inside my house, breaking everything with a bat. Pieces of furniture were scattered across the floor. They turned toward me and rushed at me immediately without hesitation. The first hit came fast, and I raised my arm without thinking. The impact was sharp, and I dropped to the floor instantly. The second one grabbed me and slammed me down harder. I couldn't breathe, and everything felt slow for a moment. I heard my son upstairs, and I forced myself to scream for him to lock himself in his room. My voice came out broken, but loud enough. Before the next hit landed, a loud crash came from the back of the house, and everything stopped for a second. Glass shattered and echoed through the room. That pause felt long enough for me to understand something was about to happen. Baxter ran in through the broken window and went straight for one of them without slowing down. He hit him hard and bit into his arm immediately. The attacker screamed and tried to pull away but couldn't get free. The other one tried to hit Baxter, but I grabbed him and pulled him off balance. My son ran downstairs and hit the second attacker with a chair. That forced him to step back and lose control. The one being bitten panicked and kept trying to escape, but Baxter didn't let go. The second attacker dragged him toward the door. They ran out together without trying to fight anymore. The police found them quickly and brought them in that same night. My son recognized them immediately as people from his school. They admitted they had been harassing him for months and wanted to take it further. They didn't seem nervous when explaining it. They also admitted they hacked the app and manipulated the messages using information they found about us online. They wanted to scare me and push things further. The break-in wasn't about stealing anything, and that made everything worse. They said they just wanted to see how far they could go.
If your pet suddenly reacts to a sound it has never heard before, you need to pay attention. Because I found out what causes that, and I wish I hadn't. I work night shifts at a veterinary clinic that stays open longer than most, and over time I got used to dealing with routine cases that rarely turn into anything serious. So I learned to move through the job without expecting anything unusual. The clinic was quiet that night, with only the usual background noise of machines and distant traffic. After finishing a simple case, I sat down to complete my notes, but after I clicked a pen near it, I heard a scratching sound from the back area. When I went to check on it, I noticed that it was a dog that nearly broke its teeth trying to escape from a metal cage. I told myself it was nothing unusual, but the moment I saw the animal inside the cage, I realized that the behavior I was about to witness wasn't something I had seen before in a healthy patient. The dog had been admitted earlier, and its file showed no signs of trauma or aggression. So I expected a normal reaction when I approached, but instead it froze completely while staring past me toward the hallway. I opened the cage slowly and reached in to check its vitals, moving my hand the same way I always do. And the moment my wrist reached a certain angle, the dog reacted instantly, throwing itself backward and clawing at the cage with enough force to hurt itself. Later that same night, a small cat came in with different owners and no connection to the dog. And while I was writing notes, I clicked a pen without thinking, and the cat reacted in the exact same way, with the same timing and level of panic. At that point, I stopped treating it like coincidence. I reviewed both cases carefully, and even though they had nothing in common on paper, their reactions were identical in a way that didn't match normal animal behavior, which pushed me to start looking into other cases with similar patterns. Over the next few days, I went through old records and flagged cases where animals showed extreme fear responses without a clear cause. And the more files I checked, the more I noticed that the triggers were always the same, including specific sounds and hand movements that shouldn't have meant anything to them. Before opening each new file, I felt a growing sense of resistance. Even with that, I kept going. Every case led back to the same breeder, even when the animals had been adopted at different times and by different people, and there were no reports of abuse or poor conditions that could explain identical reactions across different species. That consistency made the situation harder to dismiss. When I called the breeder, the person who answered spoke very calm, and their answers focused on terms like consistency and controlled environments, repeating those ideas without offering real details about how the animals were raised. That conversation didn't give me answers, but it confirmed that something wasn't normal. I arranged a visit under the excuse of adopting, and they agreed without hesitation, giving me an address outside the city that didn't match any known facility, which made the decision feel less like a risk and more like something I needed to see for myself. The building didn't look like a typical breeding place, since there were no outdoor areas or signs of activity, and the silence around it stood out more than anything else, making the whole place feel controlled rather than natural. I stayed in my car for a moment before going in, trying to steady myself without fully understanding why. Inside, the environment was clean to the point where it felt staged, with rows of cages that were perfectly aligned and animals that didn't make any noise as I walked past them. Instead of reacting normally, they followed me with their eyes, and some of them shifted their bodies in ways that matched the patterns I had seen in the clinic. Before entering a section with younger animals, I slowed down without deciding to, and when one of the puppies suddenly flinched hard as if something had hit it, even though nothing had happened, I turned to the man guiding me and asked what caused that reaction. Adjustment phase. He didn't stop walking or change his tone, and that lack of concern made the explanation feel worse than if he had tried to justify it, since it suggested that this kind of behavior was expected and repeated. As we moved through the facility, I noticed that everything was organized around control, from the layout of the cages to the way the animals responded to specific movements, and that detail stayed with me when he left me alone near a door marked private. I stood in front of the door for a moment, listening to a low mechanical sound coming from inside, and even though I knew I shouldn't open it, I couldn't ignore everything I had already seen, so I pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was colder than the rest of the building, and it was filled with equipment that didn't belong in a breeding facility, including recording systems, restraint setups, and screens displaying behavioral data. On a table nearby, I found files that documented reactions to specific stimuli, with detailed logs showing how many times each response had been repeated, and the patterns matched exactly what I had seen in the clinic. The more I read, the clearer it became that these animals were not being raised in a normal way. The logs referred to replication cycles instead of breeding, and each cycle showed small adjustments to behavior, as if someone was refining a result over time. I heard movement behind me and turned to see the man standing in the doorway. He had returned without making a noise. "You were not supposed to see this. What is this?" The man took a breath and said to me, looking worried, "They are copies, improved each cycle, and the reactions you noticed are part of the process." I grabbed a metal tool from the table and hit his shoulder to create space, then ran out of the room without waiting to see how he reacted. The hallway felt different on the way out, and when I hit one of the cages by accident, several animals reacted at the same time with synchronized movements that made it clear they were not acting independently, which made it harder to focus on getting out. As I approached the exit, a large dog stepped into my path and blocked me, and when I tried to move around it, the animal adjusted instantly, mirroring my position with precision that didn't match normal behavior, forcing me to think quickly about how to get past it. I grabbed a tray and threw it against the wall to create a loud noise, and the sudden sound made the dog flinch just enough for me to get around it, and I used that moment to reach the door while hearing footsteps behind me getting closer at a controlled pace. I pushed the door open, ran to my car, and struggled to get the keys in while trying to keep moving. And once I was inside, I locked the doors and started the engine, driving away without looking back until the building was out of sight. I reported everything to the authorities and gave them the exact location, but when they went to investigate, they found nothing since the building was empty and showed no signs of recent activity, which made it impossible to prove what I had seen. Back at the clinic, I tried to return to normal work, but the pattern didn't stop, and new cases kept showing up with the same reactions, even when they came from different places and different owners, which made it clear that the source hadn't disappeared. I checked the records again and found a new breeder listed, with a different name but the same structure in the information. And at that point, I understood that the operation was still active, just under a different identity, which meant the problem was still spreading. Now, every time I treat an animal, I pay attention to small details that most people would ignore, because I don't know if I am dealing with something that was born normally, or something that has been repeated enough times to behave exactly the way someone designed it to.
I've had pets since I was a child. Many of them were raised with me. Others were rescued later. I learned a lot about dogs and cats, but if there's one thing I could never learn to handle, it's when they die. Krog, our companion for almost 7 years, died a few months ago. The void he left in the house was immense. We were never interested in having children, so Krog took up that space in our lives. Jenna, my girlfriend, and I spent our days in silence, every corner of the house reminding us of him. Jenna was the one who first suggested the idea of adopting another dog. Don't look at it as a replacement for Krog. Look at it as giving another dog a chance to have another home. I wasn't sure if I wanted another dog so soon, but I admit those words were what broke me. We ended up adopting a puppy from the shelter. He was a small Labrador cross, quiet and a bit reserved for being so young. We named him Rollo. He was the complete opposite of Krog, who had been a gale of energy, always running all over the house. Rollo, on the other hand, seemed content to sleep most of the time and nibble on his toys from time to time. He seemed perfect for what we needed at the time, some calm and peace. The first few weeks with Rollo went exactly as we expected. He adapted quickly to his new home and was hardly any trouble. He slept in the dining room on a small bed, always quiet. Jenna and I were starting to feel a little bit better. The house didn't feel so empty with him there. But one night as we were lying down, we heard something strange. It was coming from the dining room, where Rollo was sleeping. A noise that sounded like something was moving back and forth. Jenna turned to me in bed and whispered, "Did you hear that?" "Yes. Wait for me here." "Be careful. Yell if you need help or anything." "No problem. I'm sure it's just Rollo." When I got to the dining room, I found Rollo running from one side of the room to the other, completely out of control. As soon as he saw me, he seemed to calm down, but he still looked excited. Not scared, but amused. It was strange behavior, especially coming from a dog that had always been so calm. I tried to reassure him, but he wouldn't listen. Jenna arrived soon after, and we both watched in silence, not knowing what to do. Finally, I managed to lift Rollo into my arms, and he slowly began to calm down. Jenna was still half asleep and asked me what I thought had happened. I didn't know what to answer. It was weird, but I thought maybe I had a bad dream or that I heard something outside. However, in the days that followed, Rollo's behavior began to repeat itself. Every night, around the same time, he would start running around the house like crazy. During the day, he was his usual calm puppy self, but when night fell, something changed. Jenna became concerned. We suggested taking him to the vet, but other than his strange nighttime behavior, he didn't seem to have any other symptoms. He ate well and slept well, until nightfall. Then one night, the noises began to intensify. It was no longer just Rollo's footsteps running. We heard banging, loud banging, coming from the dining room. We got up to see what was going on and found the puppy, panting, staring at us as if he knew something we didn't. But there was no sign of what had happened, no clue as to what had caused the banging. Everything in the house was in its place. The situation got worse. Now, every night, the banging and the noises were getting more violent. Something was happening in our house. If it had been Krog, we could justify those noises as him playing and throwing chairs. But this dog was very small. There was no way he could do this unless he had enormous strength that we didn't know about. One night, while trying to sleep, I heard what sounded like footsteps. They weren't Rollo's, they were heavier, like someone walking through the dining room. I got up and, again, found nothing. But one night the knocking became even louder, and they were no longer just noises. This wasn't Rollo. Someone was in the house. We heard a crash as if some glass had broken. Jenna screamed from the bedroom, and we both ran into the dining room, thinking the puppy had something to do with it. The first thing we saw was Rollo barking like crazy, looking up at a window that was broken. The glass covered the floor, and there, in the middle of the dining room, there were 4 people. There were 2 men and 2 women, all young, maybe teenagers. They were standing there, wearing white, smiling masks. Each carried a knife, and they didn't say a word. They just started laughing, a high-pitched, mocking sound that sent a chill down my spine. Before I could react, one of the boys hit me in the face. I fell to the ground, feeling the taste of blood in my mouth. I was trying to pull myself together. I watched as another one of the guys grabbed Jenna by the arm and threw her to the ground. They started kicking her, laughing all the while as if it was a game to them. I got up, but before I could get close, another one of the guys put a knife to Jenna's neck and looked at me. "If you move, I'll kill her." I was paralyzed. I knew I couldn't do anything, not without risking Jenna's life. The 4 teenagers just looked at us, enjoying the terror on our faces. "We're going to rip out all your teeth,"
And then we'll make you watch as we kill your girlfriend. The last thing you'll see is her dead body.
If this kept up, the teenagers would keep their promise. Even if this got me killed, I had to act. I lunged at one of the boys, the one who was kicking Jenna, and threw him to the ground. I grabbed him by the neck and started squeezing with all my strength. The boy was struggling to get free, but I wasn't about to let go. If I kept squeezing him, I would surely kill him. If only he would faint.
Let go, or she dies. Now!
I stopped, letting go of the boy I had been strangling. He slowly stood up, a smile on his face.
That was a big mistake.
He walked over to Rollo, who was still shivering in the corner of the room, and grabbed him by the collar.
They really deserve a punishment. Yeah, you're right, honey. I think this puppy is going to pay for what you did.
Without thinking, the man picked up the dog and carried him to the center of the room. After that, he put his big boot on his head and stared at me, implying that he was going to crush him. He was going to do it. There was nothing we could do about it. But before he could, the boy screamed in pain. He fell to the ground, clutching his foot. Something had bitten him, a deep, bleeding wound. But there was nothing there. Chairs began to move around the house as if something was pushing them. Footsteps could be heard, fast, running through the house. The teenagers looked around, terrified. Within seconds, they dropped their knives and fled in terror. One of the boys didn't escape so easily. Before he reached the door, something grabbed him from behind. We couldn't see what it was, but one of his feet lifted as if something was ripping him. The other teenagers tried to help him, pulling him toward the door. Finally, they managed to pull him out, and they all ran away as fast as they could. Jenna and I were in shock. We didn't understand what had happened. She and I stayed in each other's arms, thinking this would be our turn. But nothing happened. Whatever had appeared had protected us. Rollo was still in his corner, shaking, but he was safe. We called the police, though we had no idea how to explain what had happened. The officers arrived and took our statements, but we never told them the end of it, only that the teenagers left after we had defended ourselves. The next morning, we checked the security cameras in the courtyard, which was the only place we had them installed. Looking for some clue as to what had happened, what we saw left us speechless. A figure began to materialize in the images. It was Krog, our dead dog walking slowly through the garden. It was only for a second, but we saw him. At that moment, we understood everything. The banging in the house, the noises. It was him. Krog was never really gone. He was still there, protecting us, taking care of Rollo, playing with him every night. Whenever Krog would wreck the house, he would calm down when we opened the door, just like in the dining room every time we saw it happen. Many other people would have wanted to move out of there after that. And before that happened, we were going to do that. But because of the price, we didn't. We were afraid that wherever we went, Krog wouldn't follow us. We pooled all of our savings, took out several loans, and asked for help from our family. And we bought the house. I know that many people would be scared every time they heard a noise at midnight. But we are glad. We know that those noises mean that Krog is there, protecting us, playing with the puppy he never got to know in life.
My name is Andreas, and I am 55 years old. A few months ago, I separated from Yamina, who was my girlfriend for almost 7 years. We ended on good terms, or so it seemed. It was one of those breakups where you just realize that things don't work anymore. We talked it over, she left, and I stayed in this apartment alone. I've always been a quiet person, Working as a web developer keeps me busy, but when I get home, I like to disconnect. My only social interaction outside of work is the 2 stray dogs that are always hanging out near the square. I've fed them several times, and although they are unowned, they seem to be like neighborhood dogs. No one bothers them, and I always see them when I walk by the plaza on my way home from work. Sometimes they come up and I greet them, give them some food, and they go on their way. It all started after the separation. First, it was a couple of times that I noticed some people watching me on my way home from work. I didn't think they were going to get me in trouble. Maybe it was my paranoia or just a coincidence, but as the days went by, the same faces kept appearing, always looking at me, always in the same corner, as if they were waiting for something. They didn't say anything, they just looked at me. I could never quite see their faces, at least one of the 2 of them. I let it go, but then I started getting strange messages on my social networks. Someone was telling me that they knew where I lived, that they had my schedule under control, that I wasn't going to be alone for long. I thought they were just practical jokes, but those jokes didn't stop. I told myself that these people were not related to those who were watching me, but the coincidence was too much. One afternoon, I came home from work as usual, walking through the square with my headphones on, trying to ignore the stares that I was now sure were not coincidences. In the distance, I saw 2 guys on a motorcycle, one taller than the other, with a straight face and a strange attitude. It was not only their presence that unsettled me, but the way they were watching me. It was no longer a coincidence. They knew exactly who I was. I quickened my pace with the feeling that they did too. However, the biker never got any closer. They kept their distance as if waiting for the right moment. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. I went to the police station the next day, took the messages, and told everything that was happening to me. But the response was disappointing. They told me that as long as there was no direct threat, they couldn't do anything. In other words, as long as those guys didn't do anything, I was on my own. From that day on, I saw them more often. The men on the motorcycle are always at a distance, but present. Every time I left the house, I felt watched and harassed without having any idea why. The day it all happened was a national holiday, and as a freelance developer, many times I could stay at home, but other times I had to go out no matter what date it was. That day there was no one on the street. The neighborhood looked like a desert, something quite rare where I lived. I thought that with fewer people around, those guys on the motorcycle wouldn't show up. I was wrong. As I crossed the square, I heard them before I saw them, and before I could react, they were on top of me. This time, they didn't stay at a distance. The taller one got off the bike and hit me in the face without warning. I fell to the ground, dazed, feeling the metallic taste of blood in my mouth. Confused and in pain, I could hear the sadistic laughter of my attacker. He had not attacked me simply to rob me. I recognized that sadistic and unnecessarily cruel laugh. That was my ex's brother. In all the time I had been with her, I had only seen him 2 or 3 times. They had a very bad relationship. Clearly, the man was not attacking me because she had told him. No, he had different motives. The man always hated me from the first time he saw me. Just because I had some money, he always thought I underestimated him and that I was a rich kid. That the moment I stopped being his sister's boyfriend, he would give me a lesson in humility. The other guy, shorter, was still on the bike watching, laughing. I knew that if I didn't do something fast, this wasn't going to end well for me. They were waiting for more than just hitting me. I felt the weight of despair take hold of me. I always knew you were trash. It was obvious that my sister would realize it too. Do you know how much I wanted to do this? Do you know how many fights I had with my family over this? By now, you're not off limits anymore, are you? I tried to speak, but the pain in my body prevented me from doing so. The guy wouldn't stop hitting me. My mind was racing. What had I done to him? Had I looked at him wrong? Had I worn clothes he didn't like? I'm not just here to kill you. I also want your money and your house. But first, it will be your life. He said this with a macabre smile, taking something out of his pocket. It glittered. A gun. Pure fear came over me at that moment. I wasn't going to get out of this alive if I didn't do something. The bike moved a little, as if they were getting ready to leave after they were done with me. I knew this was the moment. I had to act. I had to do something, anything to get out of this situation. I reached for something with my hand, anything that could serve as a defense. At that moment, I managed to grab a handful of dirt and dust from the floor of the square. Without thinking twice, I threw it straight in his face. His scream of surprise and pain gave me the moment of distraction I needed. I got up as best I could and started running, ignoring the pain in every part of my body. The two guys didn't take long to react. The man jumped on the bike and the driver accelerated behind me. But I was already halfway to my building. Every step was torture, but the fear was stronger than the pain. I knew that if I got home, maybe I could lock myself in. Maybe I could call for help. But they weren't going to let me get away that easy. I turned a corner, and just before I got to my block, I felt the engine approaching again. The guy had gotten off the bike and was now running toward me with a gun in hand. I had no time to think. As I was about to be cornered, something unexpected happened. The two stray dogs, the same ones I always fed, appeared out of nowhere and pounced on the guy with the gun. Barking filled the air as the dogs attacked him mercilessly. The guy screamed and tried to defend himself, but the dogs wouldn't let him. The other one, the one driving the motorcycle, tried to approach to help him, but stopped when he saw the scene. It was clear that he was not expecting it. The man threatened to attack one of the dogs, but he seemed panicked. He was terrified of dogs. Furious, the man ran to the motorcycle, and the other man sped off. Days after the attack, the police informed me that the two men were in custody and would face serious charges. Yamina didn't know anything about them, but she always knew that her brother hated me. She just didn't want to tell me as so not to scare me. The motives? You could say none. He was always an obsessive and violent man. A thief, and although he never admitted it, a murderer. The dogs, my saviors, I saw them the next day. They were in the neighborhood as usual, quiet. I approached them and fed them as I used to do. That day it was quite cold and I decided to take them to my house. One thing led to another, and I ended up adopting them.
No one will believe me, but I'm sure my family and I live in a haunted smart home. It was the worst nightmare. I almost died right there with my kids, and I haven't been able to walk normally since the incident. We moved into that house after I got promoted, and I pushed hard for it, because I wanted something better for my family, something modern that made life easier. The place was fully automated, and everything inside responded to voice commands, or ran on its own schedule. The system greeted us by name as soon as we walked in, and my kids were excited because the lights turned on automatically and the blinds adjusted without anyone touching them, while my wife kept asking how everything worked at the same time. I told her it was simple and that we would get used to it quickly, even though I was still learning it myself. That first night, everything worked exactly as expected, and I remember standing alone in the kitchen watching the fridge screen glow, while thinking this was the kind of life I had been working toward, something stable and controlled. At that moment, I trusted the house completely. I started noticing small mechanical sounds that did not match normal activity, like panels clicking and vents adjusting without reason, and even though everything looked fine, I could tell something was running without being asked. One night, I heard the fridge door open while I was in the living room, and when I walked into the kitchen, it was already wide open with no one near it, and the system logs showed nothing unusual. I closed it and stayed there for a while, waiting to see if it would happen again, but it stayed still. During dinner, the TV turned on by itself and started switching channels fast, before stopping on static, with the volume rising higher than normal, and my kids covered their ears, while my wife told me to shut it off. I turned it off manually, but there was no record of any command in the system history. I didn't know what I was doing wrong to cause so many glitches, or if it was actually the company's fault. Things got worse, in a way that made it impossible to relax because every device seemed to act on its own at random times, and my wife started getting nervous even if she tried to hide it. My kids stopped laughing about it and started asking if something was wrong, and I could not give them a real answer because every time I checked the system, it said everything was working normally, which made it harder to explain what we were experiencing. There was a moment one night when everything went completely quiet, and I remember standing still because the house stopped reacting for the first time since the problem started. Then every kitchen cabinet slammed open at the same time with a loud impact, and plates started falling, while my kids screamed from the other room, and I ran to close them, but they kept opening again as if something inside was pushing them. My wife grabbed the kids and pulled them away, while asking me what was happening, and I could not answer her. I tried using my phone to access the controls, but everything appeared offline, even though the house was still active, and when I used voice commands, there was no response at all, which made it clear that we had lost control completely. We decided to leave immediately. None of us felt safe anymore, and the kids were already crying, while my wife tried to keep them calm. We moved quickly toward the front door, expecting it to open like always, but it did not respond. I tried the manual override panel, but the screen froze and then went dark while the lock stayed engaged, and I pushed harder against the handle without any result. My wife asked me if it was broken, and I could hear the panic in her voice, even though she tried to stay calm. Right after that, every window in the house started opening and slamming shut over and over again, with enough force to shake the frames, and furniture began moving across the floor without anyone touching it. A shelf came off the wall and dropped, and a chair slid across the room until it hit the wall. The alarm system activated with a loud sound that filled the entire house, and the lights started flashing in a fast sequence that made it difficult to see clearly, while my phone lost connection completely. And at that point, I understood that we were trapped inside something that was no longer responding to us. The smell came first, and it was strong enough to make it clear that something inside the walls was burning even before we saw flames, and I started checking the outlets while my wife kept the kids close to her. I saw sparks coming from one socket, and then another followed from a different wall. There was a short moment where the lights grew brighter than normal, and then dimmed almost completely, and during that time, I could hear sharp sounds coming from inside the walls, like wires snapping under pressure. The fire started in the kitchen when the oven door opened by itself, and flames pushed out toward the cabinets. And at the same time, the fridge screen cracked and burst outward, sending pieces across the floor. My wife pulled the kids back, while I grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall. The extinguisher worked for only a few seconds before it stopped completely, and the flames kept spreading while smoke filled the room faster than I expected, and the kids started coughing while my wife told me we needed to get out right now. We ran toward the hallway, but the lights above us exploded one by one as we moved, and glass fell around us while the smoke made it harder to breathe, and when I tried another door, it was locked, just like the front one, which made it clear that the house was not letting us leave. We moved toward the stairs because it was the only option left, and even though the heat was rising, I thought the second floor might give us another way out. The kids went first, and my wife stayed close behind them while I followed. There was a deep sound from above, and the structure shifted in a way that made it clear something was about to fail. And I looked up just as part of the ceiling started to crack. A section of the ceiling collapsed in front of us, blocking the path and sending debris across the floor, and fire pushed through the opening immediately, forcing us to turn back toward the stairs while the kids cried loudly, and my wife told them to keep moving. We made it back down, but as soon as we reached the bottom, a large section of the wall near the entrance broke loose and fell toward us, and I tried to move, but it caught my leg and drove me to the ground, pinning me completely. My wife tried to lift the debris, but it did not move, and I pulled at my leg while realizing it was trapped at an angle that made no sense. And when I looked down, I saw how bad it was because the lower part was no longer aligned, and there was too much blood. The fire was getting closer, and the heat was building fast while the kids screamed for me. I told them to go, because staying there would not save me, and even though they refused at first, the smoke forced them back until firefighters broke in through a window and pulled them out, and I stayed there longer trying to free myself, but my leg was completely stuck and not responding anymore. I remember the firefighters coming back for me with tools and cutting through the debris while the fire surrounded the area, and I remember the moment when the pressure on my leg finally lifted, but after that, that, everything went dark. When I woke up in the hospital, my wife was sitting next to me and told me the kids were safe, and that was the only thing that mattered at that moment. But when I looked down, I saw that my leg was gone below the knee. The investigation later said it was a system failure combined with electrical issues, but they never explained why the doors locked or why the system stopped responding, and no one gave a real answer for what happened inside that house. We're living in a boarding house now. It's the only thing we can afford after the damage.
I told you to leave. I moved into her place after a few months of dating. The place was huge and fully automated, with a system that controlled the lights, doors, temperature, and even the water, and she handled it like it was completely normal while I was still trying to learn how everything worked. She walked me through the house during my first day, showing me how every room responded to voice commands or touch panels. Everything reacted instantly, like the house was always waiting for instructions. At one point, she mentioned her ex while we were in the kitchen, explaining that he worked in advanced security technology and had designed most of the system that ran the house. She said they stayed in contact because of their kid and because he still handled maintenance when needed, and I told her I had no problem with that because I believed it would not affect anything between us. The first night, I noticed that the house never felt inactive, like something was always running behind the walls even when everything looked normal. The first issue was small enough to ignore, and that is exactly what I did, because I did not want to create tension over something that could not be explained easily. One morning while I was making coffee, the kitchen lights flickered briefly and then returned to normal, and I stood there watching them for a few seconds before checking the control panel. Everything looked fine with no warnings or errors, so I assumed it was a minor glitch and moved on without thinking too much about it. Later that day, I mentioned it to her and she checked the system logs on her phone, scrolling through them carefully before telling me nothing unusual had been recorded. She seemed slightly confused because the system had been serviced recently, but she did not treat it as something serious. A few days later, while I was alone in the living room, the temperature dropped suddenly in a way that felt unnatural because it happened too fast, and when I tried to adjust it using the panel, it did not respond at first. After a few seconds, it corrected itself without my input, and when she came home later, everything worked perfectly again. The pattern became clear after that, because every issue happened only when I was alone, and that detail made it harder to ignore, even if I tried to stay calm about it. She called her ex to ask him to check the system, but he said he was traveling for work and could not help at the moment, which did not match how serious the situation could be. That same night, while I was alone in the bedroom, the speaker in the corner turned on with a low click, and then a voice came through that sounded controlled and intentional, without distortion or hesitation. "Get out of my house." I stood up and looked around even though I knew there was nothing to see, and I spoke back because staying silent felt worse than confronting it. "Who is this?" There was no response, and the system returned to normal as if nothing had happened, which made the situation harder to process because it did not behave like a random error. The next day, I decided not to tell her yet because I needed to confirm what I had heard, and instead I contacted a technician who was not connected to her ex, explaining that I thought the system might have been accessed remotely. He agreed to come that afternoon, and I waited in the house while paying attention to every small detail. Before he arrived, I decided to take a shower to clear my head, and I entered the bathroom while checking the control panel before turning on the water, trying to stay focused on something normal. The temperature started at a normal level, and I stepped under the water, but within seconds, the heat increased sharply in a way that forced me to move back. I reached for the panel and tried to lower the temperature, but it did not respond, which made me press it again while watching for any change. Nothing happened. The water kept getting hotter and the air inside the bathroom started to change, becoming dry and difficult to breathe, which made me move toward the door because staying there was no longer an option. I grabbed the handle and turned it, but it did not move, and I pulled harder while trying to keep control of my breathing. The door stayed locked. I hit it with my shoulder and then with both hands, trying to force it open, but it did not give at all, and the heat continued to rise. "Open the door!" The speaker turned on. "I told you to leave." The heat inside the bathroom kept rising to a level that made it hard to think clearly, and I started shouting for help even though I knew no one else was there because doing nothing was not an option. I tried the door again using all my weight to push against it, but it did not move, and the handle was too hot to hold, which forced me to let go and step back while trying to stay focused. My skin reacted quickly, and the pain made it harder to move, but I kept going between the door and the panel because stopping meant giving up. "Stop this!" The system ignored every command, and the sound of the water grew louder as the pressure increased. I lowered myself closer to the floor, hoping the air would be easier to breathe, but it did not change much, and my chest felt tight as I tried to control my breathing. I forced myself to stand again, even though my body was starting to fail, because I knew I could not stay there. Then I heard movement outside. My girlfriend had arrived. "Open the door!" I moved toward it and hit it again while trying to answer. She tried the handle, pulling hard, but it did not move. The speaker spoke again. "This is not what we agreed. He shouldn't be here." Her voice changed and she started arguing with the system. "Please, just stop." The heat did not drop. "I will end it. Just do not kill him." There was a pause and then everything stopped at once. The water shut off, the vent stopped, and the door unlocked, and when it opened, the cooler air from outside hit me in a way that made the pain feel even sharper. She pulled me out of the bathroom, dragging me across the floor while trying to keep me awake, and her voice sounded different, urgent and controlled at the same time. "Stay with me." I tried to respond, but my body was not cooperating, and everything felt distant while I focused on breathing. The speaker in the hallway turned on one last time. "Do not bring anyone else here." She did not answer, and the system went silent, which made the house feel empty in a way that was worse than before. She called for help and explained it as a system failure, and I stayed on the floor while the pain became harder to ignore with every second. I survived, but the burns were serious enough to keep me in recovery for weeks, and the damage changed how I moved and how I reacted to heat. When they asked what happened, we both said it was a malfunction. After I left the hospital, I did not go back, and we did not continue the relationship, because what happened made it clear that there was something between her and her ex that I had not understood. She admitted there were conditions about the house, rules that had never been said directly but were always there, and one of those rules was that no one else was supposed to live there. He still had full access to the system and he used it without hesitation, and she still lives there.
I lived in a fully automated house with my husband and my mother, and every system inside it was designed to keep her safe because she had Alzheimer's and could forget where she was at any moment. So we depended on technology more than most people ever should. The house controlled the locks, the lights, and the cameras, and it also spoke to her throughout the day, reminding her to eat, to take her medication, and to stay away from the doors at night. So we believed we had covered every possible risk. My husband supported everything without hesitation, and he treated my mother with patience, even when she repeated the same questions over and over again. But everything changed when my mother disappeared from a house that was supposed to make something like that impossible. I came home late that afternoon, and the house reacted as it always did by turning on the lights and greeting me. But something felt off because the living room was too quiet and my mother was not sitting in her usual spot. I called her name more than once and walked through the house faster than usual, checking each room with growing anxiety because she never stayed silent like that, and her routine never changed without a reason. Her bedroom was empty, and the bed was still made, and her shoes were still near the door, which made the situation harder to understand because she would not leave without them, especially in her condition. We checked the doors together and confirmed that every lock was still active, and when we reviewed the system logs, there were no records of doors opening or any forced entry that could explain what happened. The cameras showed empty spaces and quiet hallways, and the only explanation we had was that she somehow used a blind spot and managed to leave during a moment when nothing was recorded, even though that seemed unlikely. We reported her missing, and the police treated it as a case involving a vulnerable person who may have wandered off, and even though that explanation was possible, it did not feel right to me. At night, I stayed awake, watching the camera feeds again and again while my husband tried to calm me down, but I could not accept that she had simply disappeared without leaving any trace behind. Several days passed without any updates. One afternoon, I sat in the kitchen and asked the system to show me activity logs from the previous week, and I forced myself to go through every entry carefully because I needed something that explained what happened. At first, everything looked normal, but then I noticed entries during hours when I was not at home, and those entries showed that my husband had been inside the house when he told me he was working. I kept reading and focused on the day my mother disappeared, and her last recorded activity showed her sitting in the living room, followed by a gap that matched what we already knew. Then I saw a new entry that showed the front door unlocking about an hour later, and the system identified my husband as the one who entered the house at that time. I opened the camera footage and watched him walk in quickly while looking around in a way that did not match his normal behavior, and instead of checking on my mother, he went straight to the bathroom. The camera showed him entering and closing the door, and when he came out several minutes later, he left the house without doing anything else, which made no sense given the situation. I stayed in that chair trying to process what I had just seen, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this was not a simple disappearance. I reviewed the footage again and noticed that he was wearing thin gloves when he entered earlier that day, which he never did during normal routines, and that detail made it impossible to ignore what I was starting to understand. I returned to the kitchen and asked the system to show me everything related to him from the past week, and this time, I focused on audio logs because I needed more than images to understand what happened. The system listed several entries, and I sat down to listen to them, even though I was already afraid of what I might hear, because I knew I could not stop at that point. The first recording included footsteps, a door closing, and his voice in a tone I had never heard before, and he spoke in a low, intense way that made the situation clear. "Stop moving." After that, there was a sound of struggle and something hitting a hard surface, and the recording ended abruptly, leaving no doubt that something violent had happened. The second recording captured a dragging sound moving slowly across the floor, followed by a heavy noise that suggested someone was being moved without control, and then there was a wet sound that confirmed my fear. The third recording included running water and his breathing becoming uneven, and when he spoke again, his voice carried frustration. "I told you to stay in your room." When the audio stopped, I understood exactly what had happened, and I called the police without waiting because I could not stay inside that house with him knowing what I knew. He came home before the police arrived, and the moment he saw me standing in the kitchen, he realized that something was wrong even though I had not explained anything yet. I asked him what he had done, and instead of answering directly, he tried to approach me while speaking calmly, which made the situation feel more dangerous because his tone did not match what I had heard. I stepped back and kept distance, but he moved closer and his expression changed when I told him that I had listened to the recordings, which made it clear that he understood what I knew. He tried to grab me, and I reacted by pushing him away and moving toward the front door, but it was locked by the system and did not respond immediately. He caught my arm and pushed me against the wall, and the impact made it hard to focus, but I forced myself to keep moving and managed to break free by pushing him again. I ran toward the door again while he followed, but the sound of sirens outside interrupted everything, and that moment gave me enough time to stay out of his reach until the police forced their way inside. They restrained him quickly, and he stopped resisting once they had control, which made the situation feel even more disturbing because he accepted what was happening. The investigation confirmed that my mother had been killed inside the bathroom, and the evidence they found matched the recordings and the timeline stored in the system. They explained how he used the blind spots and the times when I was not at home to carry out everything without being seen, and how he relied on the system's limits to hide what he did. The house did exactly what it was designed to do, which was record and respond, but it never acted on its own to prevent anything, and that is something that stays with me every day. The most disturbing part is the fact that the house heard everything and stayed silent until I forced it to speak. In 2015, James Andrew Bates was accused of murder. The body of the victim was found in a hot tub at Bates's home in Bentonville, Arkansas. Investigators believe that a nearby Amazon Echo might have captured crucial audio since the device was active and playing music that night, and they issued a warrant seeking its recordings to reconstruct the events surrounding the death, making it one of the first cases where a smart home device was treated as potential evidence in a murder investigation.
My name is Brandon White, and I used to get food from the McDonald's restaurant close to my house every day. A couple of months ago, I walked in to get something and was attended by a new female employee named Mary. She was middle-aged, had short brown hair, and was slightly overweight. While I waited for my order, she tried to get to know me, making small talk. I didn't mind at the time. She seemed nice, and there was nothing odd about our conversation. After giving me my sandwich, I left, not knowing that visiting McDonald's that day would lead to my biggest mistake ever. The next few days after meeting her weren't that different from the first. But as more days went by, I began to notice something strange about Mary. For starters, Mary was always the one taking my orders. This was unusual for McDonald's. To make things worse, the conversations she tried to have with me only became weirder and left me uncomfortable in most situations. She would say strange things like how I looked so sexy and tasty, and sometimes ask me questions that no employee should have been interested in. Everything about Mary's behavior was odd. She looked almost 10 years older than me and didn't strike me as that sort of person in any way. Eventually, I began visiting another McDonald's far away from my house, deciding against reporting Mary and getting her fired. A couple of weeks went by, and one day, I walked into the new McDonald's and saw Mary working at the counter. I was shocked and expected her to tell me if she was filling in for someone, but instead, Mary acted as if she'd never left the old McDonald's and didn't address the situation at all. She resumed her usual attempts at small talk and disturbing remarks, but I simply ignored everything she said, got my order, and left. I decided not to go to McDonald's for a while, and only had it when a few friends placed orders at their apartments. I didn't know if Mary still worked there, but I wasn't eager to find out. One afternoon, while walking home after getting groceries, someone suddenly bumped into me out of nowhere, and most of my groceries fell. I bent over to pick them up, and the woman who had bumped into me began apologizing as she joined me to pick up the groceries. When I looked up to thank her, I was shocked to see Mary standing in front of me. I remained in silence as my mind raced. Was this woman stalking me, or was this just a coincidence? After standing there in silence, Mary finally said, "Well, young man, I'm in a hurry, so sorry about that," and left, acting like she didn't know who I was. I brushed it off again as a coincidence and walked home. As I got home, I realized my house keys weren't on me, but I was in a hurry and figured I had probably left without them. So I quickly got my spare key from under the mat, dropped my groceries inside, and left to meet up with my colleagues. My coworkers and I spent a couple of hours getting drunk and playing games on our day off. I left and headed home. But as I opened my door, something about it felt different. That feeling you get when someone else has been in your home was everywhere. But I was wasted, and all I wanted to do was take a shower. So I quickly looked around and headed to the bathroom. Later that night, I was alone in my living room watching HBO when my phone rang. I was curious about who could be calling me so late at night, so I answered with a simple, "Hello?" There wasn't a voice on the other end, but I could hear someone breathing heavily for about a minute before finally hearing a whispery voice say, "Come upstairs." I ended the call immediately, assuming it was some kids playing a prank, but something about it felt off, and despite my efforts, I couldn't stop thinking about it, and how I felt someone was in my home earlier that day. About 3 minutes later, my phone rang again, and it was the same number. I simply ignored it and tried to focus on something else. That's when I heard a noise coming from upstairs. I quickly switched off the TV and decided to listen more closely to make sure I wasn't hearing things. Sure enough, I heard a loud noise from upstairs, followed by another, and soon enough, I could tell they were footsteps, and someone was actually in my home. I quickly grabbed my phone and called the police before heading to the kitchen and grabbing a knife. The house was silent for the next few minutes, so I began to walk up the stairs slowly to make sure there was actually an intruder. As I checked each room one after the other, I began to calm down and question if I heard anything at all. Eventually, there was only one room left to check, and as I opened the door to the guest room, I was filled with a feeling of relief as all I could see was an empty room. And the sense of relief I had just gotten was quickly overcome with fear. As out of the corner of my eye, I could see a figure standing behind the door. Before I could say anything, the person jumped on me, knocking the knife out of my hand and settling on top of me, pinning both my arms under her. In that moment, all I could feel was terror as Mary looked me dead in the eyes before proceeding to grab the knife I had dropped. Mary slowly brought her head closer to me and began to sniff me, like she was taking in deep breaths. My skin began to crawl, and I began to struggle to get free, but there was no use, as Mary was a lot heavier than I was. She eventually stopped sniffing me and proceeded to say, "Oh, I missed you so much, baby. But you've been avoiding me lately. You looked so tasty today. I had to see you. And well, now I have to take a little bite." She smiled and continued, "Now, it'll hurt a little, but I'm sure you don't mind, darling." Mary quickly brought down the knife on my hand, taking my pinky finger clean off. The pain shot through my body, and I couldn't help but let out a piercing scream. Blood began to spill everywhere, and Mary couldn't hold back her laugh as she threw my finger in her mouth and chewed it down until nothing remained. At that point, I had begun to close my eyes as I slowly lost consciousness from the pain. That's when Mary said, "No, baby, don't do that. I was just about to have one of your tastier parts." She then proceeded to hold my eyelids open as she lowered the knife slowly towards my eye. Before I could begin to plead with her, police sirens filled the air, and I was immediately filled with relief. Mary quickly got off me and pointed the knife at me, saying, "No. How did they find out, baby? You didn't call them, did you?" One look at the woman in front of me, and I could tell she was absolutely crazy. She began pacing the room and was visibly worried, so I decided it was better to play into her game than act out, as I already knew how far she was willing to go. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know it was you waiting for me, so I called them. Just let me go down there and send them away, and I'll be right back." Mary looked at me with what seemed to be relief, and I could tell she truly believed what I had just said. She replied, "All right, honey, be quick now," and lowered the knife, letting me leave. I bolted downstairs with one thing in mind: get as far away from Mary as I could. As I stepped out of the house, I was met by a group of officers. They asked if anyone else was in the house before storming in and exiting with Mary in the next few minutes. Mary was taken away in tears as she screamed at me for betraying her and not keeping my word, confirming to the police that she was completely crazy. In the last few days, I've been informed by the authorities that Mary is wanted in several states for multiple counts of rape, assault, and suspicion of cannibalism. I was lucky enough to be the only one of her victims to survive her ordeal. That encounter still keeps me up at night, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about the first time I met Mary in McDonald's. I hope my story has helped you all realize that we really know nothing about the people who serve us and our families at McDonald's. In my case, I met a crazy serial killer who posed as a happy-go-lucky woman, but in your case, it just might be the devil who hands you your Happy Meal with a smile on their face. Hello, everyone. We are thrilled that you have been enjoying our videos. Your support means the world to us. If you've liked what you've seen, please consider liking and subscribing to our channel. We would love to hear which one of our videos is your favorite. We're on a mission to reach 100,000 members in the SSG family, and with your help, we can achieve that goal. Thank you for being a part of our journey. Christmas is usually one of the best holidays of the year. The kids are always happy. There's food, parties, and presents. It's really that time of year when we can leave all our problems behind and concentrate on being happy, even if it's just for a day or two. The story I'm about to tell you was just before Christmas, in those days when we were getting ready for the holidays, and it was all happy times. What neither I nor my children expected was that those moments of happiness would be interrupted because we had an appointment with the unknown. Something we didn't understand at the time, and still don't today, was stalking us. And you know what? It still is. If you don't know what you're up against, how can you defeat it? It all started on a snowy day. During those days, we decided to take a mini vacation and went to my parents' country house. My wife was hesitant to go since we had a lot of work to do when we got back. But the kids were on vacation from school and insisted all year to go, so we indulged them. It was only a few days before Christmas. We had already put up the Christmas tree and decorated our house in town. But the cabin still lacked some Christmas spirit. We brought some decorations to beautify the cabin a bit, but to my surprise, my parents had left us something. A human-sized Santa Claus. It looked like an animatronic, but it was very strange. It was too thin. Normally, Santa Clauses are similar to the real Santa, fat with a huge smile. But there was something weird about this one. His look was textured. He looked like some Santa Claus out of some child's nightmares. I was about to put it away, but my kids saw it at the same time I did, and for some reason, they liked it. Kids really do have the weirdest tastes. Other than that, the day continued as normal. We spent the evening watching movies and eating something as a family. The kids seemed very entertained, and my wife and I were very happy about it. Nothing prepared us for what would happen the next day. After spending the night sleeping comfortably, a scream woke my wife and me at the same time. It was the scream of one of our children. As soon as we woke up, we both looked out the window where the scream was coming from. My two children were outside, running through the snow, running away from someone. When I looked back a little further, I clearly saw their attacker. No, it couldn't be true. It was the Santa Claus animatronics I had put up yesterday. This didn't make any sense. As I watched him run in the direction of my children, I could see him walk very naturally. This was not an animatronic or anything like that. It moved like a human, but it was so thin, who could fit into that costume? I told my wife to call the police as soon as possible while I went to get our children and protect them from their attacker. At that point, I didn't care about bundling up or getting a gun. I had to go as soon as possible. As soon as I got out, I did not go in the direction of my children, but towards my attacker, who for some reason was not running, but only walking in the direction of my children. I don't know what this being was or why it was attacking my children, but I knew I had to do something to stop it. With all my strength, I threw myself at him. I still thought that all this must have some explanation. Maybe it was a person disguised as a Santa. Yes, that must be it. That was the only logical explanation. A little confident from the lie I fed myself, I tried to take him down, but that's when despair and desolation took over my whole body. When I was just a few inches away from him, about to knock him down, I was overcome with a horrible feeling of fear and sadness that prevented me from moving forward. Defeated and crying, I fell to the ground, clutching my chest from the pain I felt. This was not the pain of a physical attack. It was not the pain of an illness. It was the pain one feels when one is very nervous or sad. Santa simply ignored me and kept walking in the direction of my children. Whatever it was, he was aware of what was happening to me. Possibly in some way, he caused it, since he didn't flinch an inch from my attack, knowing what was going to happen. After a few seconds that felt like hours, I gathered all my strength to get up and follow him. The pain and sadness I felt at that moment was so great that even though it faded as soon as Santa left, it still haunted me. For me, I would have stayed on the ground surrounded by ice crying, but I couldn't afford the luxury. That being was after my children, and I wouldn't let them feel for a second what I felt at that moment, or worse. I got up and ran as fast as I could through the ice. My children and Santa were already far away in the forest, but the sound of their screams guided me on the right path. With every centimeter I ran, I could feel that horrible feeling taking over my body again. The pain in my chest was getting bigger and bigger. I couldn't be far away. The screams became closer than ever until, crying against a tree, I found my two children. In front of them, the strange figure walked slowly in their direction. As soon as I saw this image, I turned to Santa Claus. You would think that nothing had changed from the last time I did it, and ended up on the ice crying. But for me, everything had changed. This time, I was watching as the strange being was about to attack my children, and at that moment, I didn't care about anything but protecting them. I ignored the pain, the fear, the sadness, the cold. All I could see was this thing approaching my children. With a war cry, I lunged at it and knocked it to the ice. Blinded by rage, I didn't realize what was really going on. I was just hitting an empty Santa Claus doll. All the feeling of fear and desperation had vanished the moment I made contact with them. Now I was doing nothing more than hitting an inanimate object while my children cried beside me. When I realized this, I stepped aside and went to hug my children while Santa stood destroyed next to us. It was all over. Once we got back, I threw all the parts of that Santa Claus in the trash and put a new one once we got home. I'll be honest with you, the new Santa Claus didn't last more than 2 days. Maybe I was still a little paranoid, but I could swear that every once in a while, it felt like it wasn't in the same position I left it in. As if his head or limbs were moving when no one was watching. Also, I couldn't shake this feeling. This feeling of paranoia that when I was near him, I was constantly being watched. For their part, my children didn't talk about it, but I could see in their eyes that they were terrified. At first, my wife thought everything I told her was a joke. But over time, she began to believe us. Although part of her thinks it's a strange collective paranoia. I can't blame her, and I can't blame you if you don't believe me. Not even in my wildest nightmares could I think something like this could happen. But I guess, as a human, there are things we can never understand. And you know what? It's okay. I don't want to understand what happened that day. I just don't want it to happen again. I just want my family to be safe.
Working at Burger King was an average job for a guy like me. Often the nights were quiet, with only a handful of customers coming in for a quick dinner before closing. But on that particular night, the story I'm about to tell you was anything but ordinary. I was alone on the night shift, as usual, and the clock read 10 p.m. when it all started. The night was cold and dark, and the rain was pounding on the windows of the restaurant, creating a gloomy atmosphere. I had finished cleaning the tables and was about to close when I saw a lone man standing outside in the pouring rain. He wore a black jacket and a hat that hid half his face, but something about his posture sent a shiver down my spine. I still couldn't refuse entry to a customer, so I opened the door for him. The man walked in without saying a word, just staring at me with his cold, dark eyes. He ordered a hamburger and a soda, and I prepared his order. The atmosphere in the restaurant was strange, as if silence and tension had taken over the place. As I delivered his food, I tried to make friendly conversation, but the man didn't respond. He just kept staring at me. Something in his gaze made me uneasy, but I decided not to pay much attention to it. The man sat in a corner of the restaurant, alone, silent. I continued with my usual tasks, but I couldn't help but feel watched. A few minutes passed, and I noticed that the man didn't touch his food. He just sat there, looking at me. I felt uncomfortable, as if I were in a scene from a horror movie. Finally, I decided to approach him and ask if everything was okay. I walked up to his table and spoke to him. "Is everything all right, sir?" The man looked up, but instead of answering, he smiled in a disturbing way. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and his teeth looked sharp as knives. At that moment, I knew something wasn't right, but I couldn't just let it go. The man finally spoke, and his voice was soft and creepy. "I like your restaurant. It's a good place to be alone." I didn't know what to answer, so I just nodded and walked away from his table. I walked back to the counter, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling that came over me. The night was slowly progressing, and the man was still sitting in his corner, not touching his food. I decided to call the manager and tell him what was going on. But the call was mysteriously cut off before I could say a word. I felt like I was trapped in a silent nightmare. I decided to take a break and headed for the bathroom. I needed a moment to regain my composure. While I was in the bathroom, I heard footsteps outside. As I came out, I saw the man walking around the restaurant, looking at everything as if he were inspecting every nook and cranny. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I couldn't stay hidden in the bathroom forever. When I returned to the counter, the man approached and finally broke his silence. "You have an interesting place here. I like it a lot." His words were unsettling, and his gaze kept boring a hole into me. I didn't know how to respond, so I simply said thank you, trying to remain calm. The clock struck midnight, and the man still wouldn't touch his food. At that moment, I realized I couldn't let this continue. I asked him if he needed anything else, if he was satisfied with his dinner. "I need you to show me the kitchen." My heart began to pound. I was not allowed to show customers the kitchen, and something about the way he was asking made me even more uneasy. I politely explained that I couldn't do that it was against restaurant policy. But the man was unfazed. He simply got up from his chair and started walking towards the kitchen. I reacted as quickly as I could and started to press the panic button behind the counter, but I didn't know if it was working. The button didn't react and didn't make any sound. Who knows? Maybe it didn't work months ago. Maybe it never worked. Terrified, I made a really bad decision. Driven by pure fear combined with my survival instinct, I ran after him, trying to stop him. I begged him not to come in, but he wouldn't listen. When he reached the kitchen, he stopped and started looking around, as if he was looking for something. I felt trapped between my duty to protect the restaurant and the fear that was gripping me. The man walked over to one of the meat cleavers we had in the kitchen and picked it up. At that moment, I knew I had to do something. I grabbed a frying pan and prepared to defend myself, even though it was clear I was at a disadvantage. "Do you know what silence is, kid?" "Silence can be scary, right?" The man advanced towards me, his blade held high. I prepared to defend myself with the frying pan, but it was useless. Laughing, he pulled the pan out of my hand as if I were a child playing with something dangerous. Like a cornered animal, I fell to the ground crying, accepting my fate, aware that I couldn't do anything to defend myself against this man. In retrospect, I could have tried to run. I could have thrown myself at him. Anything would have been better than just giving up like that. But you know, it really is impossible to act logically in that situation. All I could think of was that a few hours earlier I was at home, getting dressed for a boring workday, thinking about what to eat when I get home. Suddenly, it was all over. Now I was condemned to death by a man I didn't know. His motives were totally unknown. I was just simply going to be the victim of a sick man who was going to kill me for fun. As if knowing what I was thinking and how defeated I felt, the man left the knife on the table and began to rub his hands across my neck, enjoying every second in which I couldn't defend myself. At that moment, I realized something even more terrible. The knife was just to scare me more, but he never intended to use it. I mean, he didn't need to. He just wanted to torture me, to make my death last as long as possible. I could see in his face, in his sick and twisted eyes, how he was going to enjoy what he was about to do to me. Slowly, the man put his hands on my neck. I could feel the veins in his hands getting more and more pronounced, while very slowly his hands applied pressure to my neck. Little by little, I began to lose my breath. The force in his hands was getting stronger and stronger. What would happen first? Would I die of suffocation? Would my neck break? All I could think about was my family, my girlfriend, my pet. What were they doing right now? Could they have imagined that I was about to die? My vision started to get blurrier. I was fainting. But then, suddenly, the sound of police sirens became audible outside. The man stopped and listened. For a moment, the tension in the kitchen vanished. Police lights flashed outside, and we heard the officers enter the restaurant. The officers approached the man and detained him. Apparently, the emergency button worked and alerted my boss, who saw on the cameras everything that was going on. The man was arrested and taken out of the restaurant in handcuffs. He didn't say a word as he was led away, but his cold stare and disturbing smile remained etched in my mind. After he was taken away, calm returned to the restaurant. My manager arrived soon after, concerned and relieved at the same time. I explained what had happened, and he thanked me for taking steps to protect the place. He assured me that the man would not cause trouble again, but I was no longer interested. I would never set foot in that Burger King again. Although the man was arrested, I never knew who he was or why he'd come to the restaurant that night. The experience left me with a lingering sense of unease and fear. The silence and the look of the psychopathic man stayed with me long after he was taken away. That night of terror at Burger King was an experience I'll never forget. I learned that sometimes evil can lurk in the most unexpected places, and that silence can be more terrifying than any scream. Since then, I never looked at a hamburger the same way again. And I always made sure the doors to my house were locked at night because I couldn't help but feel that sooner or later, that man would come back to my house to finish what he started.
The date was June 15th, 2014. My team and I had decided to finally investigate the old asylum that stood alone and abandoned in Williamsburg, Virginia. This particular abandoned asylum had been the talk of the town for many years prior, with multiple stories and myths, the most famous being about students who snuck in and were found days later completely silent and void of themselves. According to the locals, the government followed up by launching an investigation, sending officials to uncover what had happened, but their findings were so grave they decided to sweep the case under the rug, hiding all students, parents, and officials who entered the asylum. The case was eventually buried, and the asylum was completely sealed off as toxic and harmful. The history of the asylum, while it was functioning, was still unknown, and the details of the students who explored it after it was abandoned are also unknown. My name is Jacob Benedict, and these are the details of how my team and I uncovered the terrifying secrets of the Williamsburg Abandoned Asylum. My team consisted of 5 individuals, including me, and at the time, we'd only been paranormal investigators for about 3 years. In these 3 years of working cases and seeing all sorts of things, we had come to the conclusion that despite whatever stories were told, they were just stories, and there really was no such thing as ghosts, creatures, or things that go bump at night. In this particular case, we heard first about it in March 2014, and finally decided to make the trip to the asylum in June. We got to the town late that day, and didn't do much except lodge in our hotel and brief on the case. We were immediately struck by the inconsistencies and the lack of information about the asylum, which set this case apart from anything we had encountered in the past. It piqued our curiosity and fueled our determination to uncover its secrets. The next day, we headed into town and split up into 2 groups, with 3 of my colleagues heading to the library to try to find out more about the history of the asylum, while Jessica, another one of my colleagues, and I went around town asking locals for any information they had. "Excuse me, ma'am. Do you mind if we ask you a few questions?" I said as we approached a middle-aged lady in the street. She replied with,
"Yes, sure. But I'm in a hurry and I don't have much time."
"Yeah, no problem. It'll be quick. Can you provide us with any information on your town's old asylum?" I said. The expression on her face changed slightly before responding with,
"Well, I can't tell you much. If it has to do with that asylum, I know just as much as you."
Her response shocked me as I'd assumed a local would have a lot more information than we did. So I said, "Oh, I apologize. I had assumed since you lived here you'd know a lot more than I do.
Well, I can see how you'd think that, but I'm sorry, I don't know much, and I don't think anyone you speak to would know much either. Ever since I moved here, I've understood that the asylum is something to stay far away from.
She paused for a minute before saying,
Of course, there are still stories and ideas, but I'll tell you this for goodwill. Nothing good comes from that asylum. It's best you leave it alone.
Despite saying she knew nothing, something about this lady's warning felt real to me. I also noticed she mentioned she moved here, so I decided to ask. So, before you leave, do you know if maybe there's anyone who grew up here and maybe knows something that could help us? She looked annoyed but sluggishly replied,
A lot of people grew up in this town, but the only one I can think of to help is Mary. Her family was involved somehow with the asylum, and she doesn't live that far.
After that, the lady kindly gave us directions to Mary's house, and in less than 10 minutes, we were standing at our front door. The house was extremely large and quiet, but it was obviously old, and I could tell just by looking at it that there hadn't been any repairs in years. We knocked, and in about 2 minutes, an elderly lady opened the door slightly.
Can I help you?
She said, standing behind the door. Yes, we're looking for Mary. We wanted to ask a few questions about the abandoned asylum, I replied. The woman remained silent for a while before reluctantly inviting us into the home. The house's interior was just as run down as its exterior, with the paint peeling off and its floors confirming to me that the house was extremely old. Mary showed us a couch and informed us to wait for her here as she went to get what she needed. She returned a few minutes later with a file completely covered in dust and told us everything there was to know about the abandoned asylum was in there. After a while of talking, we discovered Mary's grandfather was head of operations at the asylum while it was running, and he passed away shortly after it was closed. She explained the file was put together by an employee at the asylum during an investigation that eventually resulted in the closing of the asylum. The case was handled quietly, and the family obtained the file after the asylum was closed, keeping it to avoid any scandals or leaks. However, when the kids went missing, the police asked Mary's father for information, and again, the file was used quietly, and the government found its contents too problematic and swept the case under the rug. Mary appeared emotional talking about this. She proceeded to tell us she'd uncovered the contents of the file after her father's passing and had been burdened by the guilt of keeping it all hidden.
I wasn't going to help you at first, but you seem like good people. I think you will do the right thing with that file and bring light to the activities of what went down at that asylum.
Mary seemed to have confused us for a journalist or some sort, so I responded with, Mary, there seems to be a bit of confusion here. While we do find everything you've told us intriguing, we didn't come here to get the scoop on this. We're here because people believe the building's haunted, and there are various myths revolving around the asylum. We'd hoped you'd know a little bit about its history. Thankfully, you did. But we still need to visit the asylum and find out what's really going on. Maybe there's even some truth behind the myths. Mary's expression had completely changed now, and she looked almost pale as she said,
Whatever you do, do not visit that place. Just take the file and release the truth.
She paused before grabbing Jessica's arm and saying,
That asylum is no place for people like you. The devil lives there now. The devil and all his demons.
Jessica quickly pulled back her arm and got up before saying, Jacob, we should go. I think we have enough. Mary began to frantically look around, saying,
Don't go. Don't go.
I got up and thanked Mary before leaving with Jessica and heading to the asylum. Little did I know, that would be the biggest mistake we ever made. I think it was about an hour later, and my entire group was standing at the gates of the asylum. We had met up earlier to discuss what we had all discovered. The group that visited the library didn't find much, but they'd managed to find the blueprints of the asylum. We told them about our discussion with Mary and proceeded to look at the contents of the file together. The file contained all sorts of horrible tests and experiments that were done on the mental patients in the asylum. These experiments only led the patients to slowly lose more of themselves until they were eventually void. As time passed, patients began to die, and the asylum decided to bury the corpses on its grounds. What really began to worry the doctor, however, was the living patients who had already been losing themselves suddenly began to have regular conversations with their dead colleagues. They would be heard laughing hysterically and calling the names of the dead in the middle of the night. It didn't take long before the patients who hadn't been involved in the experiments began acting the same way, and eventually, the doctors. It was as if all those in the asylum began slowly losing themselves until they were completely void and could no longer function mentally. As we looked at the old asylum from outside its gates, it became increasingly obvious nothing good would come from walking through its doors. The asylum was a 3-story building, and it covered around 50 hectares of land. The building seemed way older than Mary's home, however, and its exterior had already begun deteriorating, adding to its already eerie look. I continued looking at the building when I suddenly saw a man staring at us from a window upstairs. That's when I said, "Hey, who the hell is that?" pointing towards the window. Everyone immediately turned their attention to where I was pointing, but shockingly, there was absolutely no one there. "Ha ha, very funny," Mason said, assuming I was playing a prank on them. I was stunned and concerned because I could have sworn I had seen someone at the window. Everyone played it off as a joke and began walking into the asylum. I followed behind and tried to focus on the task at hand, but all I could really think about was Mary's warning. I stepped into the asylum. I immediately felt the temperature go down drastically. The building was extremely cold, and although I could tell by looking at it that no one had been there in years, it didn't in any sense feel that way. It actually felt like I had walked onto a stage and had 1,000 eyes watching. We continued walking deeper into the asylum, looking for anything that would explain the paranormal stories that surrounded the building. The floors were still stained with blood, and the rooms were filled with chairs and beds with straps for the patients. The group had stayed together exploring the building when suddenly I followed them into a room, and I was alone. At that point, I'd assumed they were playing a prank on me. "Guys, very funny. You've had your laugh, now let's move on and get out of here," I said, expecting a response. Instead, I was met with a deathly silence, and the temperature got even colder. I was completely scared and alone in the room when someone walked past. I immediately walked out to follow the person, but once again, there was no one there. At this point, I decided it was better to leave the asylum and wait outside for the others. I turned to leave, but I was met with the sight of a young woman in a gown and rotting flesh standing in front of me. My heart dropped at the sight of her, and she was so close to me that I could feel her extremely cold breath on my face. The lady only had one eye intact, while the other was being eaten by maggots and releasing a rancid smell. She slowly got closer and began to open her mouth. I closed my eyes and prepared for whatever was about to happen when I suddenly heard a scream from upstairs. I opened my eyes to see she was gone, and I immediately ran upstairs to see what had happened. I looked around upstairs for about 10 minutes before eventually finding Jessica sitting alone on the floor with her head in her hands. She appeared to be mumbling some words I couldn't understand, so I slowly approached her and said, "Hey Jess, are you okay? I don't know what's happening, but we need to leave right now. Come on." Jessica slowly raised her head and turned to me. She responded with, "But Jacob, we can't leave. We have to wait for the others so we can all go together." Jessica had messed up her hair in a way that had her face covered, and the room was so dark I could barely make out anything. But a part of me agreed with her, so I sat beside her and we waited. We had waited for almost 30 minutes in the dark and cold silence, so I figured it would have been a better idea to go look for the others instead. "Hey, do you remember where you lost the others? Maybe we can go find them and leave," I asked. However, I didn't get a response from Jessica. All I got was complete silence. I assumed she was probably just stressed out and didn't hear me, so I said, "Jess, we need to leave soon." This time, Jessica replied, once again lifting her head slowly to face me as she said, "Don't you get it though? We can't leave. You have to stay with us now. All of us. Together." As she faced me, her hair was out of her face, and my heart dropped as I came to the horrific realization that I hadn't found or been with Jessica at all. The woman began to slowly chuckle before bursting out into full laughter. Her laugh felt like needles piercing through my ear, and before I could react, the room was full of other patients, also partially decomposed. They all joined in with her laughter and began walking towards me. Their stench filled the room, and no matter where I looked, their faces would appear, some more filled with maggots than others. At this point, I was completely lost and could barely hear my own thoughts. My body soon began to join in on their laughter. I tried vigorously to fight and gather my thoughts, but all my body could do was laugh and laugh and laugh until I realized I had lost myself.
Sir, are you all right?
I opened my eyes slowly in response to the voice I had just heard. A part of me wondered if I was still in the asylum hallucinating, but as I regained consciousness, I looked around to see a bunch of paramedics attending to my group and me. The police were also on the scene questioning Mary, who had placed a call to inform them we were in danger after we visited her home. I stayed conscious for about 2 minutes more before blacking out and waking up 2 days later in Eastern State Hospital, Virginia. Somehow, I had regained total consciousness and was aware of my surroundings. The rest of them, however, weren't so lucky. They all appeared to be conscious, but weren't in any way responsive to what happened around them. The police informed me Mary had called them, and by the time they arrived, I was found laughing hysterically right behind the asylum's front door. This would mean I hadn't taken up to 11 steps in the asylum, and everything I'd experienced was all a part of the trance. The rest of my group, however, were found a long time later and had remained unresponsive. It's been 9 years since my experience with the asylum. Jessica and the rest of my group were placed in a different asylum. I have since given up on exploring all things paranormal, and I visit them regularly to remind myself what I experienced was real and not just a bad dream. Therapy has been helping, but I still see the patients in my nightmares, and every day I wish I had just listened to Mary's warning. I hope my experience has convinced you all that behind every myth, there is some truth. And it is only those who are suicidal that would doubt the existence of the paranormal.
The following story I'm about to tell you may seem unbelievable. I understand that it may pass as just another internet story. I also understand that even though there were witnesses, not everyone believes me, nor do my family or friends. I admit that even though I question if what I experienced is real, but I know it is. It is as real as the marks on my skin will attest. It all happened at my old job. I used to have a massage parlor in my garage, and to tell you the truth, I really liked it. I always enjoyed being a masseuse, and obviously I studied for it. I'm not going to lie to you. Every once in a while, I received some indecent proposal that honestly ruined my day. But luckily, it happened less and less, and once they got to know me, almost all my clients were regulars. Everything was going more than fine until one day. I got a surprise from one of the men who always came to me for massages. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Nothing made that day special. The weather was normal, not too hot nor too cold. Nothing had happened to me the day before, nor did I expect that day to be remarkable in any way. I simply got up, had breakfast, and went to work on a day when my agenda was composed of clients I already knew. The first few massages were normal, and I was getting ready for my next client, and that's when the nightmare began. Tim was always a normal man. He was a married man, and he never made any kind of proposition or innuendo to me. Tim had a small build. He was quite short and skinny, but I could tell he went to the gym from time to time. His personality was quite calm. He was a very polite, humble, and shy person. Needless to say, he also had a pretty low profile. I was getting ready to have a quiet session with him, but as soon as he walked in the door, I knew something was wrong. Tim was really very nervous. His face was red, and his relaxed posture was all tense, like he was really nervous about something. I greeted him politely, and he just gave me back a shy and forced smile. Something was happening to him. "Hey, Tim, sorry for the intrusion, but are you all right?"
Hi, Barbara. Yes, of course. I'm just a little tense.
Oh, I understand. Lie down. I'll do my best to make you better.
Tough week. I'd appreciate it. These last few days have been very tense.
Once Tim lay down, with his shirt off, I covered my mouth so I wouldn't scream from the shock of what I was seeing. His whole body was different. He had marks and cuts all over. But these were not marks from a fight, and he didn't look like he had been attacked. The marks were key points of his body. It was like his body had gotten bigger and his skin couldn't take it. His skin was cut like a t-shirt that he had outgrown at some point. It was all very strange. But you know what? It wasn't the worst of it. What struck me most about his back was his hair. Tim was always a very neat person. He was one of those people who hated having hair on his body, from facial hair to hair on his back to hair on his legs. The only thing he was naturally accepting of were his eyebrows and the hair on his head. That's why I was so shocked by seeing him the way I saw him. His whole body was full of hair. It was as if this man hadn't shaved for years. When was the last time I saw him? Last month? This didn't make any sense. Had he taken any medication that caused him to have an allergic reaction?
Is there something wrong with my body? What's taking you so long?
Oh, I'm sorry, Tim. I was just looking for the cream. I must admit that Tim's comment caught me totally off guard. He would never have spoken to me like that. Somewhat uncomfortable, I rubbed some cream on his back and started massaging him. Something was wrong with his back, and I don't mean the cuts or the farting. His back was moving on its own. I thought about telling him to stay still, but quickly realized that would not be possible. All these movements felt involuntary. It was as if something was happening to his back, as if it was changing.
No, not now, not again.
From one second to the next, Tim gave a great scream and began to move violently. Terrified, I just stepped back and dropped the cream. His body began to change rapidly. His muscles swelled, and Tim stopped to scratch violently all over his body. I didn't know how to react. I was alone in my house. Should I scream and alert the neighbors? Wouldn't that put me in even more danger? In the middle of everything that was happening, Tim looked at me with a lot of anger and walked slowly towards me, always scratching and with unpredictable and uncomfortable movements. Nervously, I grabbed a shovel and told him to back off. In response, he just pulled it out with one hand and threw it to the side. With some resistance, he grabbed my neck with his other hand and slowly began to squeeze me. I can't describe to you what I felt at that moment. I tried to resist. I tried to fight back. But this person was not the same shy man who always came to me for massages. Nothing I did, no struggle or attempt I made to escape seemed to have any effect on him. Make no mistake, I couldn't breathe and I was choking. But I felt that rather than drown, I would surely break my neck. I could feel my life slipping away from me as the man focused on trying to kill me. And just as it started out of nowhere, it ended. Instead of continuing to squeeze me until I ran out of air or broke my neck, he simply threw me violently against the wall. Tim threw me with such force that it was a miracle I didn't hit my head against the wall because the damage would have been irreversible. Trying to recover from the blow, I looked up and saw my attacker more furious than ever. He wasn't even focused on me anymore. He was just running all over the garage, destroying everything in his path, screaming desperately as if he was an animal that had totally lost his mind. As he screamed, I could see Tim's body move on its own, to which the man only reacted by scratching, but with such force that I thought he would pull his skin off. It was easy to see that Tim, while visibly furious, was also in a great deal of pain. However, none of this made me question what was happening. No matter how much Tim was suffering, I was the victim, and he was the person attacking me. In the midst of his fit of rage, Tim concentrated on smashing the closet, totally ignoring the fact that I was standing next to him. I took advantage of this situation to slowly approach the huge garage door. Once there, I moved it slowly to open it. The door was very hard, and I could only open it a few centimeters, which served to let some natural light into the garage. Unfortunately, that light went right into the closet Tim was destroying, which alerted him immediately. Before I could finish opening the door and escape, I felt Tim's shadow behind me again. As soon as I turned around and faced him once more, he grabbed my face with both hands and without squeezing, gave a huge, terrifying battle cry, with his face almost pressed against mine. That was the most terrifying moment I have ever experienced in my life, even worse than when he had flung me a few minutes before. His scream felt so loud, so violent, and so imposing that I felt it pierced my whole body and took away my will to continue trying to escape. After that scream, I fell to the ground, sitting down, crying with my eyes wide open. Tim was preparing to attack me once more, but at the last moment, salvation came. The garage door kept opening. It wasn't opening by itself. Several people behind it were pushing it. They were my neighbors. They were trying to get me out of the house. At that moment, I realized that even though I had not screamed or warned them that I was in danger, they all knew what I did for a living and that I was always receiving people in my garage. Tim's loud and violent screams and all the noise generated by such destruction alerted my neighbors, and almost all of them came to see what was happening to me. Once they had managed to open the garage door, they dragged me out before the eyes of a Tim who, instead of attacking them, took the opportunity that the door was open to run out of the house in his underwear. All my neighbors came to my rescue and immediately took me to the hospital. I had been saved. I must tell you, that was the last day I saw Tim. Or at least I think it was. From that day on, he never showed up or posted anything on social media again. His family never responded to my messages or tried to contact me. I never understood what happened to this man and how he went from having such a calm personality to whatever happened that afternoon. I must admit that in spite of everything, I always think about him and worry about him. Since that day, all the neighbors report seeing some kind of animal running through the neighborhood at night. I know this doesn't make sense, but sometimes I wonder, what if that monster is Tim?
My name is Charles, and for years, I've been the driver of the last bus. My shift starts at midnight and ends at 4 in the morning. Working the night shift has its share of loneliness, of course, but I've never experienced anything quite like what happened one autumn night. For the first few hours of my shift, everything went smoothly. A few passengers got on and off. It was around 2 o'clock in the morning when I arrived at the last stop before turning around and returning to the depot. The stop was located in a dark and desolate part of town, right next to an old cemetery. There were a couple of dim streetlights, but most of the streetlights were out. As usual, no passengers were waiting at the stop. As I waited for the scheduled time before departing, I turned on the interior lights of the bus to check that everything was in order. I was checking my rearview mirror when I saw a flash of movement in the darkness. I turned to look out the rearview mirror, and to my surprise, saw a man running toward the bus. It was not unusual for people to be late and trying to catch the last bus, but the way this man was moving struck me as odd. His movements were jerky and erratic, as if he was panicking. When he finally reached the back of the bus, panting and sweating, I could see his face. He was a middle-aged man with a wild, desperate look in his eyes. I decided to slow the bus down so that this man wouldn't miss it. I was never really one of those drivers who enjoy passengers missing the bus to go home, especially at times like that. The man got on the bus and sat in the back of the bus. His disturbing smile never disappeared from his face. I looked through the rearview mirror and noticed that there were no other passengers on the bus at that time. The bus resumed its march, and as we made our way through the empty streets, the man began to hum a haunting song. It was an ominous tune that I did not recognize, and his voice had an eerie tone that sent chills down my spine. As we moved on, the man continued his strange behavior. He began mumbling incoherent words and laughed disturbingly. I became increasingly uncomfortable and concerned for my safety. The possibility that I was dealing with a dangerous person became increasingly real. Finally, the man stood up and pressed the button indicating that he was getting off. This stop was completely deserted as usual. When I opened the door for the man to get off, he just stood there and kept smiling. I asked him to get off, but he did not respond. Instead, he began to walk slowly toward the front of the bus. I felt trapped in my seat, watching with growing anxiety as the man advanced toward me. His smile widened even more, revealing crooked yellow teeth. I realized I did not know how to deal with this situation, and the thought of confronting him directly terrified me. When the man was only a few steps away from me, he finally spoke. His voice was an eerie, icy whisper that made me shiver. "Do you know who I am, driver?" I shook my head, unable to answer. I had no idea who this man was or what he wanted. "Don't you remember? I was one of your passengers many years ago, one night just like this. But you wouldn't let me off. You had fun watching me miss the last bus, didn't you?" I had no memory of that incident, but that didn't matter at the time. I was too scared to think clearly. The man moved even closer, his face inches from mine. I could feel his cold, stinking breath on my face. "This is your last stop, driver. Today, it's your turn to stay behind." Before I could react, the man pushed me back with enormous force. I fell to the ground stunned as he lunged at me. I tried to scream, but his cold, skeletal hand closed over my throat, stifling my words. Looking terrified, I struggled desperately with the man who assaulted me. His eyes, full of fury and madness, were still fixed on mine as his grip grew tighter and tighter. I felt my life slipping away, and an overwhelming panic overcame me. In a last act of survival, I reached for a small flashlight I kept in my jacket pocket. I wielded it with all my strength and hit the man's head with all my might. The impact knocked him back, releasing his hold on my throat. Coughing and gasping, I took the opportunity to pull away from him. As I sat up, I saw the man withering in pain on the ground, holding his head. He looked dazed and confused. Without a second thought, I ran to the driver's door and slammed the safety door of the bus shut, making sure he couldn't reach me. Then frantically, I reached for my cell phone and called 911 for help. The emergency operator's voice calmed my nerves. I explained the situation and the location of the bus. I was promised that the police would be dispatched immediately. As I waited, I held the flashlight in one hand and the bus steering wheel in the other, watching the man on the ground. The man began to come to his senses, but instead of trying to open the front door or looking for a way out, he just sat there and stared at me. His haunting smile persisted, and it was bigger than ever. He didn't seem to be in pain or show any normal emotion. When the police officers finally arrived, the man was arrested without much resistance. As they handcuffed the man, he continued to whisper incomprehensible words and laugh, which increased my discomfort and fear of him. The officers assured me that an investigation would be conducted and that they would take steps to ensure my safety. After giving my statement to the police, I made my way to the bus stop, shaking and shocked by the experience. I couldn't recall any similar incidents, but the thought of having left someone behind on a night like that haunted me. Eventually, the authorities discovered that the man suffered from severe mental illness and had been wandering the streets for years. He was not one of my former passengers as he had claimed. Although that revelation relieved me to some extent, the experience left me deeply scarred. From that day on, nights working on the bus became even more lonely and terrifying for me. Every shadow in the darkness, every haunting laugh reminded me of that autumn night. The story became an urban legend in the area. My night bus, known as the Last Bus, gained an infamous reputation. Though I tried to move on, that sinister smile and the man's icy whispers never completely disappeared from my thoughts. And my nightlife was changed forever. It's undeniable that some people find it easier to find a job than others. The job market is very wide for young university students hungry for success. For me, on the other hand, it's very different. My name is Alfred, and I am 50 years old. But this is not a story about how hard it was to find a job. Today, I will tell you how the job I got, with a lot of effort, is almost the last job of my life. Because of life, I was never able to study or finish school. Looking for a job at my age was really very difficult. But I am the only breadwinner in my family, so I had to do it. Every job I went to, they told me different things. Some would tell me that they would call me after talking to other candidates, but I could see in their eyes that they knew they wouldn't. Others were more direct and told me I was too old for any job, even something as simple as a supermarket cashier. I went from failure to failure, but just as I was giving up, I got an opportunity and started working right away. The job was quite simple. I was going to be the caretaker of a soccer field. The team was pretty humble, so the stadium was pretty modest too. I'm used to everyone at work pretending I'm not there, and when they noticed my existence, it was to ask me for things in a bad way or make fun of me. But this place was different. All the players and workers at the club were really warm and welcoming. They all made me feel a part of a big family that started with the president and ended with me. The people at this job were very nice, and in the beginning, I was very happy. Until I discovered something that changed everything. Although it felt like a warm and friendly place during the day, the locker room was pretty old. When no one was in them, they looked abandoned and very scary. To tell you the truth, I didn't feel scared or anything like that. I was a grown-up person, and I wasn't in the mood for superstitions or getting scared just because I was alone. The players told ghost stories and said that the field was haunted. They would tell me to be careful at night when I was alone, but I could tell that they were all laughing and not taking themselves seriously. My first nights guarding the court were pretty quiet. I came close to falling asleep several times. I really had nothing to do, but eventually I would get used to it and have a routine prepared, like carrying a book that I would read after cleaning up. I must admit that I heard several noises inside the locker room or in the facilities in general, but none of them caught my attention. Wherever I go, there will always be noises. If I am scared by each one of them, I would have to dedicate myself to something else. The important thing was that there were no people sneaking into the facility or a rat problem. I was pretty quiet all night and didn't let anything break my peace. Little did I know that this tranquility would give me a false sense of confidence that would endanger my life. That day, my shift was just beginning. I had just finished cleaning the players' locker room and I was leaving to clean a hallway. But I heard a noise that caught my attention. The noise was coming from inside the locker room, and it was too loud to ignore. Surely, no animal could have done it. It was like a thump as if someone had tried to destroy a dugout, but there was no one there, as I had just exited through the only entrance to that locker room. Confused, I took out my cell phone and went back into the locker room, recording everything I saw. I didn't realize it at the time, but during the recording, a terrifying shadow passed by the wall at an enormous speed. Even though I didn't see the shadow, I felt like something in the locker room had changed in the 3 minutes I had left. It may have been the same locker room visually, but now there was something about it that terrified me. The place felt icy cold, as if a huge, windless, gelid chill had taken over the whole place. Immediately I got goosebumps, not because of the cold, but because I felt that I was no longer alone. Before I could react, the battery of my cell phone ran out and it turned off, which made no sense because until a few minutes ago, I had it at more than 80% charge. Without seeing anything, but knowing that I was not alone, I ran out of the locker room as fast as I could. But it was not going to be that easy. Halfway through, I ran out of air and fell to the ground. It was a horrible feeling. I couldn't breathe and my lungs felt like they were going to burst. I gathered all my strength to get up again, but there was someone in front of me. There was a man, a local soccer player I didn't know. Why was he dressed as if he was going to play a match? Confused, I got up as best I could, and at that moment, I realized that something was wrong with this man. His skin was whiter than that of a normal person. It was too pale a white color, unnatural, as if he were dead. His eyes were glassy and his body was full of bruises. The moment our eyes met, the man began to cry, tears of blood running down his face at enormous speed. Whatever this was, it was not human. While still trying to catch my breath, I tried to run past him, but he grabbed me by the neck with one hand. As I stood up, the man looked at me with a desperate and sad face and shouted, "You must help me! Who are you? Let me go! Please, you have to help me. I didn't ask for this. I was desperate. I'm married. I have a 3-year-old son. It can't end like this. Help me." "Hey man, I have a family too. I don't know who you are, but please don't hurt me. I just want to see my family. You don't understand the things they do to me. I can't go back. I don't want to go back. I just want to have another chance to hug my family. I want to see them again. I don't want to do this. I was lost and no one would help me. I beg you, do something." Make no mistake, I was terrified. Every fiber of my body was screaming that I was in enormous danger. But while he was saying these things to me, while this man was screaming at me and squeezing me with his arm, I felt that there was no evil in him. There was desperation. Suddenly, he let go of me and screamed for help again. But this time, he wasn't looking at me. He was looking behind me. The temperature dropped even lower, and even though the light was on, the room got darker and darker with each passing second. I looked behind me and saw a bunch of shadows going from one place to another, slowly approaching where we were. "They are here! Don't let them take me, please!" In a matter of seconds, the shadows surrounded the whole place, and ignoring me, they threw themselves against the terrified man. The shadows began to surround his entire body as he screamed louder and louder in despair. He dropped to the floor and began to spin as if on fire. And in my presence, something invisible began to drag him around the place until I lost sight of him. I could not believe anything I had just seen. My only reaction was to stay on the floor in the fetal position, crying and praying that this was all a nightmare. As soon as I got home, I saw my family surprised that I had arrived early. Without saying a word to them, I hugged them and started crying. After I didn't answer them when they asked me what was wrong, they just hugged me. The next day, I went to present my resignation. When I told the president of the club the whole story, he was shocked. At first, he thought it was a bad joke perpetuated by the players. But when I told him about the man, he believed me. This man was a soccer player who had been with the club when it was founded. Being a small club, not many people know this, but this man had taken his own life by hanging himself with a rope, leaving his family alone. The last thing he told me was that, normally, he would not have believed me. But the night before, someone with the voice of the deceased player knocked on his office door asking for help. But when he went to see, there was no one there. After accepting my resignation, he told me that he only hoped that he was now in a better place and had found peace. I was left thinking with some bitterness that by the looks of those shadows that took him away, I don't think that happened. The 7th of November 2014 was a day that marked a turning point in my life. Before that fateful day, I was someone who enjoyed experiencing new and exciting things. But after the horrors I witnessed at the Villisca Axe Murder House in Villisca, Iowa, I hadn't had a good night's sleep since. To fully understand my story, I'll need to take you back to the 9th of June, 1912. One of the most horrifying days the state of Iowa has ever seen. It all began with a family called the Moores. The head of the house was a man named Josiah B. Moore, and his wife was Sarah Nee Montgomery Moore. The couple had 4 children named Mary, Herman Montgomery, Arthur Boyd, and Paul Vernon. The Moores were a very well-known and affluent family in the community, and they were liked by everyone. That Sunday, the couple's 10-year-old daughter, Catherine, invited 2 sisters over to spend the night at their home, as they were her friends. Catherine's friends were named Lena Gertrude and Ina May Stillinger. Lena was 12 and Ina was 8. After the visitors had settled in, the entire Moore family, in addition to Lena and Ina, went to the Presbyterian church that evening. The family visited the church because they were participating in a Children's Day program that Catherine's mother, Sarah, had coordinated. The Children's Day event lasted until 9:30 p.m. that night, and when it was finally over, the family and their guests walked home. They all arrived at the Moore's residence between 9:45 and 10 p.m. And that was the last time the family and their guests were seen alive. On the 10th of June, 1912, sometime around 7 a.m. that morning, a woman named Miss Mary Peckham started to get worried after she noticed that the Moore family had not come out to do their morning chores. Miss Peckham was one of the Moore's neighbors, and not seeing them out and about this early was odd. She knocked on the door to see if everything was okay, but nobody answered. She knew that eerie silence was strange, so she tried opening the door, but it was locked. With no other options, she called Josiah's brother, Mr. Ross Moore, to help her check on them. When Ross arrived, he called out to his brother, but no one answered. So he and Miss Peckham decided to get into the house with Ross's spare key. When they finally got in, they were met with a horrific sight. The disfigured bodies of the Moore family and the Stillinger sisters were found in their home by Ross Moore and Miss Mary Peckham on the 10th of June, 1912. The authorities were immediately called to the scene, and an investigation revealed that the murders had taken place between midnight and 5 a.m. The killer, who had been waiting in the attic for the family to fall asleep, started the massacre from the master bedroom where Josiah and Sarah Moore slept. The killer used an axe to repeatedly hack Josiah's face. The cuts to his face were so vicious that Josiah's eyes were missing, and his corpse was unrecognizable. The authorities also noticed a gouge mark in the ceiling of the master bedroom, from where the killer had lifted the axe to murder him. When Josiah was dead, the killer set his sights on Sarah, and he brought down the axe's blade on her head, shattering her skull with his continuous blows. As for the couple's children, he used the blunt end of the axe on their heads as he crushed their skulls. The vicious killer had bludgeoned them all to death in the same morbid manner as their parents. After that, he went downstairs to the guest bedroom and killed the Stillinger sisters. Josiah Moore was only 43 when he was killed, and his wife Sarah was 39. As for their children, Herman was 11, May Catherine was 10, Arthur was 7, and Paul was 5. The gruesome murders of the Moore family and the Stillinger sisters shocked the entire town of Villisca. A manhunt was carried out to find the person responsible, but the killer was never found, and the crime still remains unsolved. Now, I'm sure you're wondering how this gruesome case has anything to do with my experience. But just like the Moores and the Stillinger sisters, I too had a horrific experience in their family home located at 508 East 2nd Street, Villisca. Just like most people in Iowa, I've known about the murders for as long as I can remember. I was born on the 13th of October, 1978, nearly 66 years after the murders. But even after all that time had passed, this gruesome case was still being talked about. The gruesome case was dubbed the Villisca Axe Murders, and it's often been called the most mysterious case in the United States. During my early teenage years, I always wondered why the Villisca Axe Murder case still maintained its longevity. There were many other disturbing cases in the United States that have left the minds of the masses, and I often asked myself why the Villisca Axe Murders case was so different. I looked into it a bit more when I grew older, and I soon realized why this particular case was so different than the rest. It's because, while some people believe the Moores are long dead, many others are convinced that the Moore family and their killer still roam the halls of their family home in Villisca. The rumors started a little while after the gruesome murders, as many people claimed to hear the screams of children coming from the house. Most of the Villisca residents wrote these rumors off as jokes. But as time passed by, people who visited the house came back telling more unexplainable and bizarre stories. A couple who visited the home said they could hear the Moores' children laughing as they ran around the home playing. 2 young women also reported capturing strange phantasms and apparitions on their cameras. The stories got even crazier over the years, and in 1994, a woman named Miss Martha Lynn bought the house and restored it to its 1912 condition. She stripped the Moore family home of electricity and plumbing, and she turned it into a tourist attraction. Since then, people from all over the world have come to the Villisca Axe Murder House to stay overnight and undergo paranormal experiences. The Villisca Axe Murder House has had a slew of visitors ranging from paranormal investigators to ghost hunters, and was eventually named one of the most haunted places in America. The house grew to new heights of popularity from there, and it seemed like everyone wanted to visit there. Well, everyone except me. Even though I grew up in Iowa, I always stayed clear of the place. As I said earlier, I was the kind of guy who enjoyed experiencing thrilling and exhilarating things. There were very few things I would say no to, as I was always down for anything. However, the only time I drew the line was whenever it was anything paranormal related. It had been like that since I was little, as I was always against exploring the supernatural or paranormal world. My grandmother was a strong believer in the paranormal, and while most people called her crazy, I always felt there was some truth to her crazy stories. I had sworn to never visit the Villisca Axe Murder House. But all that changed when my longtime friend Ron Lancaster visited me in Iowa. I'd met Ron during my years in college, and we'd been brothers since. Just like me, Ron enjoyed trying crazy new things, but he didn't have the same issues with anything supernatural or paranormal. Ron thought both the supernatural and paranormal worlds were all hocus pocus, and in a bid to convince me of the same, begged me to go with him to the Villisca Axe Murder House. I told him no, and nothing was going to change my mind. Ron was persistent, and he kept asking, but it didn't work. With no other options, Ron told me that he was traveling abroad the very next month, and that he really just wanted to go on a crazy adventure for old time's sake, as he wasn't sure when we'd see each other again. I wasn't sure if he was trying to guilt-trip me into going or if he was serious. But his visit was almost over, so against my better judgment, I agreed. On the 7th of November 2014, my friend Ron and I made our way to the Villisca Axe Murder House. The tourist attraction cost $428 per night, and I felt that was far too steep. But Ron offered to pay for 2 nights. Once everything had been settled, they showed us to the rooms. I remember being really freaked out throughout the night, but Ron kept cracking jokes and trying to lighten the mood. We eventually went to bed that night, and I didn't hear anything out of the ordinary. I actually had a pretty good night's sleep. The very next day, Ron couldn't stop saying, "I told you so." And even though I didn't want to admit it, he was right. I told myself that all the so-called paranormal experiences were a hoax, and I was completely over my fears. After the first night, we both spent the second day making corny ghost jokes and laughing. I was enjoying myself at the time, and I was really glad I came with Ron. But little did I know that I'd grow to regret that decision in the following minutes. Ron had gone up to his room to get his phone around 12:25 a.m., but it had been about 10 minutes, and he hadn't come back down. I wondered what was keeping him, so I went upstairs to check. When I entered the room, I saw Ron sitting on the chair with a wide grin on his face. I thought he was trying to pull a prank at first, so I told him to cut it out. But Ron didn't respond. I was about to smack him across the head when I noticed his eyes. They were filled with pure fear, and I could tell he was terrified. In an instant, the room went cold, and I couldn't move. A few seconds after that, a foul smell of rotting flesh began to fill the room, and that's when I saw it. I've always been at a loss for words whenever I tried to explain what my eyes were seeing, but it looked like some unseen figure was controlling Ron. I couldn't make out its shape, but I could tell something or someone was tugging at Ron's mouth and forcing him to smile. I also noticed Ron couldn't move by himself, and this unseen presence was playing with his body like a puppet. The scene looked like a puppet show from hell, as it seemed like Ron's limbs were being controlled by strings. I watched in horror as Ron's hand reached for the blunt scissors on the table. I could see the terror in his eyes as he struggled to make sense of what was going on, and we both tried to scream, but our lips wouldn't move. I then watched Ron take the blunt scissors and ram them into his right eye. I felt like throwing up as I watched the blood gush down from his face. I thought he was possessed at that point, because even though he was bleeding profusely, he still had a smile on his face. Ron then stabbed himself in the left eye before proceeding to repeatedly stab himself in the chest. My brain couldn't really process what was going on or why this was happening, and it was amidst all this chaos that I finally saw it. The thing I had sensed behind Ron, had finally taken shape. It was a rotting corpse that stood at 7 to 8 feet tall. Its facial features had been eaten away by maggots, so it didn't look human, and its right hand was shaped like a large axe. Within seconds of its manifestation, the standing corpse disappeared, and I let out a scream before collapsing on the floor. The staff rushed to our room to see me lying on the floor, and Ron bleeding in the chair. We were both rushed to a nearby hospital, and luckily, we were able to be saved. I don't really remember what happened during the week after that experience, but according to the doctors, I kept screaming until I lost my voice for 3 days straight. It would take me 6 months and serious therapy before I was able to speak again, and even after telling my story, people found it hard to believe. Ron, who had lost both his eyes, was the only person able to corroborate my story, but he was put into an asylum as he kept muttering gibberish whenever he was asked to speak. The news took the headlines by storm as the authorities struggled to explain what had happened that day. It would take me 2 years of serious psychological care before I was able to acclimate back into society. I've also been going to therapy every single day since then, and I was ordered to move back in with my family as I still showed some trace of insanity. And I wasn't allowed to be alone. The therapy isn't really working as I can still see it every time I close my eyes. I rarely go out, and I have to be watched 24/7. Even if it's been 9 years, I can never forget the valuable lesson I learned from my visit to the Villisca Axe Murder House. As every day I wake up, I remind myself that the dead are not to be disturbed. The story you just heard was loosely based on the real case of Robert Stephen Larson Jr. On the 7th of November 2014, 37-year-old Robert Lawson from Rhinelander, Wisconsin, was found alone in the northwest bedroom of the Villisca Axe Murder House with self-inflicted stab wounds in the chest. After the investigation, Montgomery County Sheriff Joe Sampson stated that Robert arrived with a group of friends for a recreational paranormal investigation at the Villisca Axe Murder House. A few minutes after entering the northwest bedroom, Robert called the rest of the party, who were standing outside, for help on their mobile two-way radios, Sampson told me. His companions found him stabbed in the chest from a strike that was apparently self-inflicted. They immediately called 911, and Robert was brought to a nearby hospital before being helicoptered to Crichton University Medical Center in Omaha. The police report also stated that the strange incident happened around 12:45 a.m., a time frame that mysteriously coincided with the approximate time that the brutal murders of the Moore family and the Stellinger sisters took place. Luckily, Robert Lawson was able to recover from his injuries, but he declined to speak publicly about what occurred that day. The owner of the Villisca Axe Murder House, Miss Martha Lynn, told the press that the incident was very upsetting and made a statement on the incident saying, "It's publicity, but it's not exactly the kind of publicity you desire to have. I don't want people thinking that when they come to the Villisca Axe Murder House, something's going to happen that is going to make them do something like that." Despite the strange and unexplainable incident with Mr. Robert Lawson, the Villisca Axe Murder House remains open for tourist visits and overnight stays to this very day. Back in the day before technology and social media became such an important part of our daily lives, making friends wasn't as easy as it is now. Most of the pretty women I saw in a day, I would never see again, mostly because I didn't have the balls to walk up to them and get to know them. At the same time, I was what you called a socially awkward person, and I had to go through some other means to get to know people. But then suddenly came Facebook, an app where people can make friends and find out almost everything they wanted to know about someone else, all with a simple friend request. But it wasn't what I thought it'd be, as my experience with Facebook completely changed my life. My name is Timothy Hansen, and the year was 2007. Facebook had just launched 3 years prior and was blowing up in 2006 as people had started preferring it to MySpace. I had been quite skeptical about joining at first, as I wasn't a huge fan of sharing my information online, but I eventually caved and decided to create a Facebook account. If I remember correctly, my first few suggestions were all people in New York, and I spent a while just going through their profiles, wondering if I should send a friend request, and that's when I saw her, Annabelle Tate. She was simply the most beautiful woman I had seen, but what intrigued me the most about her was her profile. It was full of pictures of her and her friends at parties, going on vacations, and in general, just living her best life. I spent a while thinking about what to do before eventually sending her a friend request. She accepted in about 2 hours and texted, "Hi, I'm Annabelle." The conversation from that point flowed as Annabelle was a very easygoing person, although now that I think about it, I believe it was just the comfort of being behind a screen. We talked for about a week online, majorly about me as she asked a lot of questions about my past and life in general. I eventually decided to ask her to meet in person. "Do you want to meet up sometime?" She replied, "Sure, where do you want to meet?" "We could get dinner tomorrow night." "I'm not in the city right now, but I get back tomorrow, so maybe the day after?" "Sure." I went out the next day to the restaurant we had agreed to meet. She wasn't there yet, so I decided to text her and ask her if everything was okay. "Is everything all right?" "I'm on my way, just running a bit late." I waited for about 10 more minutes and then I saw her. The first thing I noticed was Annabelle was a lot skinnier than she looked on her profile. She also had bags under her eyes that she had tried to cover up with makeup. She walked up to me and sat at the table before smiling and saying,
"Hey."
I smiled back and replied, "You look tired. Are you sure you're okay?" She laughed as she picked up the menu and called for the waiter. Annabelle was just as relaxed and easygoing as she was online. We talked about a lot that night, but for the most of the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with Annabelle, so I said, "Listen, are you sure you're all right? If you're not up for this, we could hang out at my place where I could take you home." She took a while to stare at her food before looking up and replying,
"I like the idea of going back to yours."
So we got the check and left. We kept talking as we walked to my apartment. We walked in and I told Annabelle to make herself comfortable while I made her a drink. I made her a gin and tonic and got back from the kitchen to see Annabelle standing playing with her thumbs as if she was nervous, so I said, "I know you said everything's all right, but are you sure you're fine?" She shook her head and replied,
Look, Tim, you're a really nice guy, but if we're going to go any further in whatever this is, there's something you need to know."
I walked closer to her as my mind raced as to what she was about to say.
"You've probably already noticed I look different from my profile. Well, that's because I've not been active for a while on that account. And the reason I've not been active on that account is that I've been really sick, and life's been so shit lately. I don't know how much longer I have, or if I even have time at all."
She was crying now, but all I could think about was how her profile managed to paint a completely fake picture of who she was. She continued with,
"My family's been telling me it isn't the end, and I should still try to be me, and that's why I accepted your friend request. I just don't want you to get your hopes up."
It's so hard having to follow them around, or just taking one I don't know anything about with them crying and screaming the whole time. I won't ever forget the feeling I got seeing the look of realization on Annabelle's face as I spoke. The worry and fear were nothing like I had seen before. She tried hitting me, but there was no use as I dragged her and held her down on the couch, and that's when she began screaming. I grabbed her throat and pressed down so hard, saying, "Stop screaming, Annabelle. Don't worry, you won't have to bother about how much longer you have to live." Her struggle continued, but not for long. I had my way with her as she passed out and died. So there you have it, officer. Annabelle Tate was my first time using Facebook, and my, what an experience she was. You're a sick man, Timothy. I'll make sure you spend the rest of your days behind bars. Say what you will, officer, but if you ask me, I didn't do anything wrong. All I did was ask to be their friend, and they agreed. All I truly wanted were some friends. You raped and killed 19 women using Facebook, and God knows how many before that. And you say all you wanted were friends? Well, you won't have to worry about that anymore. You'll soon find out what happens to your kind in prison. I'm sure a lot of people would like to be your friend.
I hope so.
People like you don't deserve compassion. Well, if that's true, officer, I guess it's a good thing I found Facebook. Hi, my name is Aiden, and I have a question for you. Have you ever worked at a fast food place? What's the weirdest thing that ever happened to you? I know a lot of people who have never really had anything happen to them other than drunken customers making a mess or family fights. In the beginning, I had never experienced anything like this, and I didn't think it would really happen to me, since I only worked in a humble neighborhood Popeye's Chicken. I never knew that in just a few months, I would have the worst night of my life. The beginning of my night shift at Popeye's went along with the typical routine of a quiet night. It was around 10 o'clock at night, a time when we usually receive more customers, and the atmosphere was chaotic, with the intense murmur of conversations scattered among the tables. But among all the people talking, one person stood out. A very tall, thin man had entered. His eyes were small but terrifying, as they were wide open. He sat in a corner away from the rest of the diners, and what disturbed me most was not simply his appearance, but his fixed, penetrating gaze. He watched each individual with an intensity that sent chills down my spine. As the night progressed, more customers joined the scene, but this man remained static, making no requests, simply observing. It was as if he was analyzing people, studying their every move. On the other hand, no one noticed him. He was like a ghost that only I could see. Suddenly, the man walked towards a family having dinner. As soon as he arrived, he looked at them all and gave them a smile. However, there was something wrong with that smile. It was rather forced, as if he was practicing an emotion that did not come naturally to him. As he engaged the family in conversation, I could sense the discomfort in them, as if something was undoubtedly out of place. The man, who seemed to be a stranger to everyone, approached the tables uninvited. As he walked, his smile widened, but his eyes remained wide open. They never seemed to close. It was as if the man never blinked. Each word he spoke seemed more intense than the last, and families became increasingly terrified after meeting him. Some even grabbed their food and left. At first, all the families he spoke to tried to be polite and friendly, but as time went on, the atmosphere became more and more tense. The man's gestures were disproportionate and his laughter was enormous. I kept watching him from my position behind the counter, attentive to what was happening. Some children were crying, and parents were looking at me sideways as if looking for help to get rid of this man without having to fight him. The man didn't seem willing to leave. It was as if he was enjoying the discomfort he was generating in others. I decided to approach, trying to remain calm. "Excuse me, sir. Do you need anything?" I asked with a forced smile, trying to hide the uneasiness that his presence generated in me. The man turned to me slowly. His gaze was fixed on me. It was penetrating and terrifying. I must admit that I froze.
Oh no, I don't need anything at all. I'm just enjoying the company. Isn't that the charm of a fast food restaurant?
His words chilled my blood. There was nothing in what he said that could be considered threatening, but something in his tone and look was sinister, as if he was toying with all of us. After a defiant smile, the man simply walked out of the restaurant as if nothing had happened. I could hear people still talking about the strange man who had appeared in the restaurant, but unlike before, they were now telling it as if it were an anecdote and making jokes, no longer afraid that the man would approach their table and do something to them. Shortly after, the clock struck 11 o'clock at night, and I decided to go out for a short break. I walked out to the parking lot of the restaurant with a cigarette in my hand. I was still quite nervous about my encounter with the scary man, but I feel I handled the situation really well. Even so, I still felt a sense of discomfort. It was as if something was still wrong. As I walked out into the parking lot, my eyes adjusted to the darkness. I headed towards my car, but in a moment, a strange hunt made me pay more attention. There in the shadows, I made out the figure of the man. He was standing near my vehicle, watching it carefully. "Hey, what are you doing here?" The man slowly turned to me, his smile widening eerily. His face reflected an unsettling calm, as if he was enjoying my surprise and fear. Without a word, he began to walk toward me with slow, deliberate steps. My heart began to pound. I instinctively backed away, trying to get back to the restaurant. I didn't know how to handle the situation. The man, with his erratic gaze and unpredictable attitude, kept getting closer. Each step he took intimidated me more than the other. I was so scared that I could barely react.
You don't need to be afraid. I'm just here to have a conversation with you.
The man continued to advance toward me with a slowness that seemed intentional. I tried to run away, but suddenly something happened to me at the worst possible moment. As soon as I started to run, I fell to the ground dizzy. It was hard to breathe, and I felt like I was going to die. I couldn't feel my arms, my legs. I couldn't feel almost anything in my body. Please stop. I'm having a panic attack. Please, don't do anything to me.
Hey, what's wrong with you? Why is this happening to you? Are you afraid of me? I just wanted to talk.
I'm sorry. I'm not feeling well.
I told you I need to talk.
Suddenly, his expression changed. His head began to shake and his eyes got even bigger. It looked like they were going out of place. His scream was so loud that it made me cry out in fear, still unable to escape.
Don't you understand? Can't you see I've been nice all night? Why can't I have a normal conversation with anyone? Have you all gone crazy? I want to talk. I want to talk. I want to talk.
As soon as he finished the last word, the man lifted me off the ground with his two hands and threw me away from him. Crying, thinking I was going to have a heart attack, I started to drag myself to the restaurant. After mustering up some energy, I got up from the ground and made a great effort to run, but I stumbled. I fell to the ground, hitting the rough pavement with bated breath.
Come on, can't you even run? Hey, come on, you can do it. Just a little run. If you can't even run, some bad guy will hurt you.
With the help of the psycho, I got up crying and ran again. I was limping, crying, humiliated. The sounds of footsteps behind me stopped. I dared to look back, and the man just stood there waving at me. With my heart pounding, I arrived at the restaurant. I tried to tell him everything that happened, but I fell back to the floor. I have had many panic attacks in my life, but this was the worst. I felt like I was going to die at any moment, but I still tried to talk. I needed the police to be called, or this psycho would hurt someone. Once I recovered, I was able to tell the manager to call the police, as there was a psychopath in the parking lot. Without hesitation, the man went to the cash register and started pushing the panic button under the counter. It didn't take long for the police to arrive, but the man was gone. Although I never saw the strange individual again that night or any other night, his presence continued to haunt me in every shadow, every dark corner of the store. As the restaurant closed, my manager called me a cab. As soon as the car started, I swear I could see a silhouette in the shadows looking at me. I could see the silhouette raise a hand and with a sinister smile, wave at me from a distance. That was the last time I saw that man again. To be honest, that was the last time I ever went near Popeyes. Nowadays, every time I leave my house, I do it with fear. There is no way for that psycho to know where I live, but I always feel that he is near me, stalking me, ready to kill me.
Hey guys, my name is Adam, and I have a story to tell you. On the outside, I'm sure I look like a normal person, someone who doesn't have much to say or just goes through much in this life. What no one knows is that I lived a night that would change anyone's life, and the consequences of what I lived are still haunting me. It all started one night in December. I was driving down a lonely road in the middle of the night. I wasn't really going anywhere. I just liked to drive at this time. I know many people will disagree and tell me that it's reckless and dangerous, but those comments never bothered me. The drive was going well. It didn't seem to be a very special night, and nothing unusual was happening. But about halfway through, one of the worst possible things that could happen to me. The car started to fail, and soon it came to a complete stop. I had no cell phone signal and was far from anywhere inhabited. I stood outside the car, waiting for someone to come by, but I knew this was very unlikely, so so I left the car on the road and decided to walk in search of help. I walked for a while and found a house at the end of the road. I approached it in the hope that someone might be able to help me. I knocked on the door, thinking about how I could convince them that I wasn't a psychopath or someone dangerous. But to my surprise, I was greeted by a couple who didn't doubt me for a second. They looked friendly, invited me in, offered me food and a place to stay for the night. I admit I started to feel a little uncomfortable, but maybe it was because they were too nice. At that moment, I thought that we were so used to people being cruel or self-serving that when we really see nice people, we get uncomfortable or think something's wrong. As we were eating dinner, I noticed that the food tasted strange, but I didn't say anything for fear of offending my hosts. They were both looking at me with huge grins from ear to ear. They seemed to be obsessed with me eating. After a few more bites, I decided to retire to rest in the room they offered me. In the middle of the night, I heard strange noises outside my room. I carefully got up and tried to get out to see what was going on, but I couldn't. The door to the room was locked. I tried not to panic, not to scream, and tried not to break the door down. But while I was thinking about what to do, I began to hear voices from the other side of the...
It seems our little guest didn't enjoy his dinner.
I know. I'm sure it lacked enough spices. He made me feel very bad.
He's ungrateful, but keep in mind he's not in his own house. It makes sense that he's a little uncomfortable.
I know, darling. Thank you.
At that moment, I relaxed a little. Maybe I was overreacting. I considered going back to sleep and the next day to apologize for the way I left the table. But suddenly, I heard something else.
Besides, what does it matter if he enjoyed the dinner or not? We're basically just feeding a piglet.
It's true, honey. You have to keep him well fed. Tomorrow, I'll make him a big breakfast. That way, when we open him up, he'll taste better.
I can't wait to taste it. It sure is delicious. I just don't understand how human flesh is so good.
Hearing those last words, my blood froze, and I was paralyzed with terror. In that instant, I understood the true nature of this family. They were cannibals. I was in the house of a family of monsters that fed on human beings. My heart was pounding. I didn't know what to do. I was trapped in the middle of the night, far from any help. I tried to stay calm, but fear paralyzed me. I activated the location on my cell phone and sent it to my brother, telling him I needed help. I quickly told him that I was kidnapped and that if he didn't act quickly, I would be killed. Before I could do anything else, I heard footsteps approaching. I tried to hide, but before I could, the door was opening. It was one of them, with a cold and sinister look. He grabbed me tightly and dragged me into another room.
You know, I knew you were listening to everything I was saying. Why do you think I said it out loud? Do you think because we live on the road we don't have cameras?
Please, don't eat me. Let me out.
Oh, come on. You think after all you heard I'd let you go?
I tried to resist, but he was stronger. He dragged me down the hall and threw me into a room with extreme ease. And as the wife arrived and joined her husband, I saw something that left me in shock. There were dismembered bodies, human remains, everywhere. I tried to escape, struggling with all my might, but they were determined to make me their next victim. Grabbing me roughly, the man sat me on a chair and grabbed both my arms so I couldn't run away. Meanwhile, the woman slowly approached me. She had a huge smile on her face, and in her hands, she had a lighted needle puncher, which was slowly moving toward my head. You know, I was terrified, like I'd never been in my life. But a part of me had some hope. One thing I had noticed since I saw the woman with the hole punch was a strange smell coming from them. It was the smell of wine. At that moment, I felt the man grabbing me somewhat unsteadily and the woman walking towards me in a very slow and meticulous way. But at the same time, erratic. These people knew what they were doing. They had killed before and had every intention of doing it again. But this time, they made a mistake. They were completely drunk. I decided to try and stay calm and loosen my body a little, looking for an opportunity to attack. When the woman was almost at my side, I managed to kick her in the knee. This caused the man to be distracted for a moment, which I took advantage of to get away from him and hit him. As soon as I regained control of the situation, I ran away, without looking back, with my heart beating so hard that I felt it would leave my body. I ran and ran, not knowing where I was going. I was lost in the darkness of the night. I heard their voices behind me, chasing me. No matter how much alcohol they had, they were still very dangerous indeed, and if they caught me, they would not forgive me for running away. This was all a nightmare that refused to end. Finally, I saw lights in the distance. I ran towards the direction they were coming from, and then I identified the lights better. I realized that I was on the road and that those lights were the police. I came screaming for help, and when they saw me, one of them asked me if my name was Adam. Apparently, these cops were surrounding the area, looking for me. I told the police everything, and they called for reinforcements and went to the cannibal's house, but they didn't find them in the house. They were probably hiding in the woods from the moment they saw the police sirens. On the other hand, everything I told you proved to be true, since they found the corpses of the previous victims and managed to identify the brutal killers. To be honest, I don't know how the case ended. After giving my testimony, I don't know how the case ended. After giving my testimony, I decided to stay away from the trial altogether. I know for sure they both received life sentences, but I really didn't want to know anything else about what happened. I didn't want to remember at all what I experienced that night. That was the last night ride I ever took. It may have been a few years ago, but I still dream of that horrible room. When I wake up, I see the eyes of both psychopaths meeting mine. It's as if they never left, as if they live inside me, refusing to let me go on with my life and mocking me because I ate human flesh that night. Since the lockdown, there's been a drastic shift in the work culture all around the world. People are opting to work from home or work from anywhere options rather than going into the office 5 days a week. Around that time, a lot of new YouTubers popped up documenting their van life experiences, and a community of van lifers was created. Luckily, my wife Lisa was one of the first people to choose van living over traditional homes. We rented our current house, bought a spacious van, and started our journey on the road. To say we didn't know the ins and outs of van living would be an understatement. We knew nothing. From the few initial YouTubers, we learned the basics like showering, storage, cooking, and laundry. But beyond that, we learned as we traveled. We have no kids, so that wasn't an issue, and we could do our jobs completely remote, so money wasn't a problem either. Usually, we drove most of the day, and around 4 in the evening, we found ourselves a good parking spot to set up and camp, and called it a day. We worked from our van and took turns driving. It was like one long road trip. But that doesn't mean we didn't face challenges on our way. Today, I'm about to share the scariest incident that happened to us in the dead of night. I remember that day like it was yesterday. It was bright and sunny, and it was Lisa's turn to drive, so I was sitting in the back doing my work. We cooked a quick lunch, and we were on our way. Around sunset, we found ourselves in a dense forest-covered freeway. Although it was a freeway, the road was narrow, and hardly any vehicles were passing us. Lisa suggested that we find a good spot and park there for the night. I wasn't quite sure, as we were in the middle of nowhere. The sun was about to set, and we had a strict no driving in the dark policy. Eventually, we found a small building by the road, and we parked there. Lisa started preparing our dinner while I set up camp outside. Although our van is more of a minibus and is pretty self-sufficient, we both prefer to spend some time outdoors after we park for the night. As I was setting the camp, the sun had already set and it was pretty dark by then. I had a small battery-powered lamp and a head torch. I began my work, and by then I was pretty good at setting up camp. Then suddenly, I heard some kind of rustling in the bushes by the tree line, just a few yards away from me. It's normal for wild animals to be in such places, so I became cautious, but continued my work. I heard the rustling again after a few minutes, and this time it was much closer. At that point, I went inside and told Lisa about the rustling noises and grabbed the small video camera we used to document our travels. I held it in one hand and continued setting up camp. That's when I heard it for the first time. The piercing scream of a woman coming from deep within the woods. I freaked, as never before had I heard a screech that disturbing. I stilled and tried to search the area in front of me, only to hear the rustling sound one more time, followed by the loud scream of the woman once again. And then there were loud footsteps coming from the woods in our direction. I left all the camp gear behind, hopped into the van, shut the door, and locked it behind me. Lisa was a bit confused as she hadn't heard anything, but as I was about to explain, we saw someone peep into our van through the slits in the curtain. I dropped to the floor and stayed there for a while. We heard someone walk around our van a few times, and then the culprit finally pounded on our front door. Lisa was terrified, and so was I. We had come across some sketchy people throughout our road trips, but nothing of this sort yet. We had a small gun, but it was inaccessible at that moment. We just lay on the floor, hoping whoever it was would go away. But much to our disappointment, we heard the alarm set below our van go off, meaning this person or animal was below our van and was trying to get to the trap door which was below it. The next thing we knew, another alarm we had set for our safety had gone off. By then, we had no clue where the attacker was. All we could hear were the two loud beepings of the alarms. Lisa was clinging to my side, trembling and terrified. The alarms were still beeping, and after some time, everything became silent. The alarms had stopped beeping. We heard no screams, rustling, or footsteps. I slowly stood up and looked outside through the window. Everything was pitch black and quiet outside. I slowly opened the door, gathered all the camping gear I had left outside, and got back in. Then Lisa and I drove away from that campsite, not caring for our rules anymore. The GPS showed a small tow a few miles ahead, and by midnight, we arrived there. We parked our van in a local grocery store parking lot and decided to grab something to eat, as we didn't get a chance to eat our dinner. In the local diner, there was hardly anyone except us. We sat there still for a few moments, just looking at each other, still recovering from the incident. That's when an old man dressed in a waiter's uniform walked up to us with a notepad in hand.
"What are you city folk doing here in our little town at this ungodly hour?"
I was the first one to talk, as Lisa was still speechless. I decided to act casual and place our order. We were just passing by and decided to make a pit stop in your lovely town. Could we both get 2 cheeseburgers and fries, please? We'd also like 1 chocolate milkshake with 2 straws. But instead of noting our order, the man kept on staring at Lisa.
"By any chance, did you folks travel through the Western Freeway?"
"Yes, we did. But why do you ask?"
"Your lady seems like she's seen a ghost. Did anything happen to you while traveling on that road?"
The old man's questions were a little intrusive, but I saw deep concern on his face. So I finally told him everything we'd experienced. He listened to us patiently, all while shooting worried glances at Lisa.
"You did good, son. Took your girl and left the damn place. No people of this town drive on that road after sunset, as there's a legend associated with that forest. This is a story my grandma told me. Back in the day, there lived a witch in that forest, and with her magic, she captured a villager and turned him into a child-eating monster. Since then, whenever people traveled on that road at night, The monster used to kill the traveling people and take the kids back to the witch by strapping them on his body. As years passed, the attacks reduced, but people driving on that road at night experienced weird things and heard cries of women begging for the lives of their kids. Now, I know your educated folks may think of this as nothing more than a nighttime story, but sometimes it's better to believe in things than to play with fire. I'll get your orders ready soon. Don't bother with the cash. It's on the house. Your kids have had enough already.
Then he walked away, and we had our food and slept in our van. The next day, we drove out of that town, and we came back home, ending our road trip once and for all. We valued our life more than the adventure and thrill of the road. But you know what the worst part was? When we got home, and I reviewed the footage from that night, I saw an ugly, fat face peeking from behind one of the trees. That monster is still out there.